The December 13th council hearing will come to order. Carla, please call the roll.
Novick.
Here.
Fritz. Fish.
Here.
Hales. Saltzman.
Here. Welcome, everybody. We're here today to have our public hearing on the inclusionary housing proposals. And we're glad to see you. We always just want to make sure you understand some of the basic rules of how we conduct ourselves. So when you do testify, you will be limited to 3 minutes or less. We'll see what the clock looks like as we get to testimony. And all you need to do is state your name for the record, unless you're a lobbyist, in which case you need to identify the organization for which you lobby. And we ask that you don't applaud or boo or hiss or anything like that, but instead signal your support by waving your hands or thumbs up or thumbs down. And with that, we will, Carla, could you read the items, please?
Item 1381, provide affordable housing through an inclusionary housing program. And 1382, provide affordable housing through an inclusionary program and update the multiple unit limited tax exemption program.
Well, thank you. I'll provide some opening remarks. 10 years ago, the Portland City Council took a controversial and bold step to ensure resources available for affordable housing by adopting an urban renewal set-aside policy. And that policy has for years provided the majority of our funding for affordable housing and has ensured that thousands of affordable units have been built in specific portions of our city. And now it's time to take things to the next level. Today, we are considering a new tool that will create affordable units throughout the city, inclusionary housing, a step towards ensuring that generations of Portlanders will live in economically integrated neighborhoods. Inclusionary housing is a policy that would give working Portlanders the possibility of living in the neighborhood they work, something that used to be a reality, but is becoming more and more unattainable in large swaths of our city, areas like Mississippi Avenue, Alberta Street, Inner Division. Inclusionary housing is a policy that gives families and children the prospect of living in mixed-income buildings and an economically diverse neighborhood, which will improve their chances to be successful in life. Inclusionary housing will not solve our affordable housing crisis, but it is a critical step towards more affordable housing in our city now and in the future. Fundamentally, inclusionary housing is about opportunity and equity. We are a city that prides ourselves on planning well. We have worked hard to ensure that jobs are located close to where people live, and we have been succeeding. But we must continue to work hard to make sure that people can actually afford to live in our city near those jobs. We need to ensure that people who comprise our workforce have places to live and to raise their families. Inclusionary zoning gives us an opportunity to attain that goal. This council conducted a work session about 3 weeks ago, and given we did have a work session, we're going to invite Housing Bureau Director Kurt Krieger and Matt Schibold to provide a short overview of the policy before us today. They will be joined by Nora Lake Brown of DRA and Associates, Joe Zinder and Tom Armstrong from the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability are also here if the council has questions for them. So before we begin testimony, I'd like to introduce a few amendments which we have distributed to all of you last week, and I believe there may be other amendments to be offered as well. So the first amendment I offer is, and I thought if we could get the amendments moved and seconded, then we'll move to the public hearing. The first amendment is a substitute ordinance for item 1379, containing a number of technical fixes to Title 30 and to Title 3. The second amendment is to...
Let's take these in order. And are there copies for the public?
Yeah,
Copies
they're there. Carla has them.
So So I'll second that amendment.
Okay. The second is an amendment to Title 33 containing technical fixes also. So I would move that.
I'll second that amendment.
Okay. Third amendment is to Title 33, adding the initial phased-in inclusion rate in Title 33. This was incorporated in housing documents, but not in the zoning code. Move that. Second it. Are there other amendments to members wish to put on the table for consideration?
Yes, Mr. President and colleagues, I have an amendment which incorporates the language that we adopted on parking minimums and linkage to inclusionary housing. And I would move this amendment.
I'll second for purposes of discussion and testimony. And Commissioner Novick has two amendments.
I have two amendments. One of them relates to the fact that we are, the Bureau of Emergency Management is developing, and Council has heard about the possibility of requiring seismic upgrades to unreinforced masonry buildings, which is essential for public safety, would also be very expensive for the building owners, and we've had a lot of discussion with building owners about what kind of financial incentives we can offer to make it more feasible for them to do those upgrades. One thing that they could theoretically do is sell off the right to excess floor area to a willing buyer that has some use for it. So we have an amendment we worked on with BPS to allow development projects that do not trigger inclusionary housing requirements, in other words, commercial projects, to increase floor area through an historic resource transfer as an alternative to doing it through voluntary inclusionary housing bonus. So you could do either one. Not all unreinforced masonry buildings are historic, but a number of them are. So specifically, the amendment is added to 33, 510, 210, paragraph 5, except as required by paragraph B6 for projects that trigger the requirements of 33.245, inclusionary housing. Bonus floor area of at least 3-to-1 must be earned from the mandatory inclusionary housing bonus options before qualifying for other bonus transfer options. And then this is the critical part. For projects that do not trigger 33.245 inclusionary housing, floor area of at least 3-to-1 must be earned from the voluntary inclusionary housing bonus option or be transferred through a historic resource transfer before qualifying for other bonus or transfer options.
So I'll second this for purposes of discussion.
Thank you.
Okay.
The second amendment is based on a conversation we had at the work session with the consultants, with David Rosen and Associates. And we were talking about the fact that in the current market, it seems like it's mostly studios and one-bedrooms that are being built. So if that's all that is offered as affordable housing, then there might not be any family housing. So they said that other jurisdictions have had an inclusionary housing requirement that's based on the number of bedrooms, not the number of units. And I called them up and said, if you had that as an alternative, would you have it be the same percentage, or does it or should it be a higher or lower percentage? And they said they thought the same percentage made sense. So what I'm offering is basically giving developers the alternative, meeting the inclusionary housing goals, either by having 20% of the units or the total number of bedrooms. So the amendment is to amend Title 30.01.120C1 and 2 to provide, quote, 20% of the units or total number of bedrooms configured into IH units. Inserted into 30.01.120D7 to state, quote, when the IH units are configured based on a percentage of the total number of bedrooms within the proposed development, the IH units must provide 2 or more bedrooms per unit, consistent with the idea of family housing. And then amend Title 3.103.040C1 to provide, quote, percent of the number of units or bedrooms. And there's a directive to amend the administrative rules consistent with these code changes.
Steve, I haven't seen this amendment before. Have you talked to the Housing Bureau and to the sponsor about this one?
Yes. We're supporting.
All right, so we'll second it for purpose of discussion.
Okay, great. So we have the amendments on the table along with the ordinances. And now we'll invite up Housing Bureau Director Kurt Krieger and Matt Chabot to give a brief overview. And Nora Lake Brown, are you going to join them as well? Okay. Good morning.
morning, members of council. It's my great pleasure to be here. Housing Director Kurt Krieger, Matt Scheibold, who's Policy and Equity Manager for the Housing Bureau, and Nora Lake Brown, who is a principal with David Rosen and Associates. First, I'd like just to say that this culminates a year's worth of work on the part of the Bureau. It's one of the reasons I came to Portland in August of 2015. And I think we're on the threshold of doing something really significant for the city of Portland. But with that sort of editorial comment, I want to just quickly lay down a pattern of facts so that the record is clear. Many of these slides were discussed at the study session, so I won't dwell on them. But it is, I think, important to make sure that the public record reflects this background material. First, the Senate Bill 1533, of course, was a top priority of the city of Portland. It successfully passed in fewer than 35 days of the short session this year, 2016. And it set a stipulated requirement that mandatory inclusionary housing could only apply to households of 80% of median income and above. It applies to rental and for sale housing with 20 or more units. And the mandate can only apply to affordable units limited to 20% of all units. We were mandated to require a menu of incentives, including system development charge or fee waivers, financing and tax exemptions, and we were required under the state law to provide a fee in lieu option. That was the underpinnings of 1533. You might also recall that during the legislative session, Commissioner Salzman brought to council a resolution which stipulated that we would have an evidence-based process that was full and inclusive. That evidence-based process began immediately after session in April when a panel of experts was convened. And I think it's important that you know that the panel of experts was drawn upon because of their expertise, either in advocacy or in development or in finance. And there was no effort to create a democratic process. This was a group of strong-willed experts with their own deals, their own proprietary interests, and their own representation within the community. So there was no effort to gain consensus of this group. I think that's an important thing, because had we tried to gain consensus, it would have been a very lukewarm proposal before you today. Instead, the panel of experts was advising the Bureau and, by extension, the Housing Commissioner, so that the Commissioner could give you his best thinking. And together with the amendments proffered today, including those offered by Commissioner Novick, we think that represents a good compromise. So the panel of experts began first looking at a series of development prototypes developed by a subconsultant to David Rosen and Associates, DRA, Eco Northwest. And those typologies represented every conceivable mix of housing types, from three-story to high-rise construction in each zone of the city. And the panel of experts was consulted on all the assumptions within that model, including profit and overhead assumptions, including land price assumptions, and including construction cost assumptions. And I think it's important to note that the market was peaking as we were developing this model. So I would say that we erred on the side of generosity when it comes to profit and overhead, as well as land price and construction costs. From that series of development prototypes, DRA developed a series of modeling assumptions and developed the nexus analysis. You might recall that we were going to do a nexus study even prior to state authorization to do inclusionary housing, so we essentially did both simultaneously. From that, DRA brought back the analysis. The panel of experts met several times, debated, discussed, refined, and came to some conclusions. There was a great deal of interest in bench testing the assumptions against real projects, and the Housing Bureau was very open about that. The Housing Bureau offered to pay for that analysis ourselves, but we made it clear that if we touched those pro formas and analyzed specific private deals, that all that information would become discoverable as public records. So under that sort of knowledge, the private development industry did their own modeling, and several of those individuals will speak to you today about their conclusions based on their assumptions. I would say that not all the assumptions are apples to apples comparisons, that they made some different assumptions than we did and that DRA did. But nonetheless, I think it was able to validate in large part that we were very close to obtaining parity in the central city, and that we had a ways to go with respect to the mixed-use corridors. And the amendments offered today, I think, close that gap in the mixed-use corridors. Then in September 2016, the program recommendations came forward, and we began the deliberation and discussion with the Planning and Sustainability Commission, which did unanimously recommend a due pass with a special attention given to the calibration of offsets. So that's the litany of what occurred over some 40 hours of public meetings over a 7-month period of time. There were probably 3 or 4 times that in private meetings with individual stakeholders to ensure that everybody knew what was going on. So this was very much an open, transparent process. And we were never constrained, I might add, by either cost or time. We had enough time to do our work. With respect to the policy framework, the citywide program, is important to note that many jurisdictions, including Seattle, are only talking about inclusionary housing in portions of the city. We felt that it was important to have a citywide program that was synchronized with your implementation of the 2035 Comprehensive Plan. That if we are going to achieve some 123,000 new housing units, 10,000 of which are intended to be permanently affordable in your comprehensive plan vision, that this needed to be a citywide program. However, we needed to calibrate the incentives by specific geographies within the city because the real estate economics vary across the city itself by neighborhood. We felt it was important to set a mandatory program at 80% of AMI consistent with state law, but to provide further incentives to encourage developers to serve the 60% of AMI and below market. So you will see that those incentives indeed are attractive, and we did that intentionally. Secondly, we wanted to prioritize units on site over the acceptance of a fee in lieu or off-site, which is quite different than many other jurisdictions. Several cities, including Seattle, actually have set their fee low enough to actually encourage developers to pay the fee rather than to provide the units. And we've said repeatedly that receiving the fee is not in the city's best interest, because we then have to use that fee to go out and compete with the private sector to buy land, and there's often a 3 to 5 year time lag between the time we receive the fee to the time we can actually produce the unit. It's much more efficacious, much more efficient to tap the hydraulics of the private market and cause affordable housing to be developed where the private investment is occurring at the same time. That said, we are providing some options to do off-site and to provide, as the law stipulates, for a fee in lieu. We are intending that this policy would apply to all buildings with 20 or more units. This council may craft some narrow exclusions. That is certainly your right. We do intend that the inclusionary units be of comparable size, composition, and distribution throughout the building, not all within a sub-basement, not all on the north side of the building, not all on lower floors versus higher floors. And I do want to speak to the amendment proffered by Commissioner Novick that we actually think the ability to combine units by bedroom and produce perhaps fewer but larger size units is really quite in the public interest, and we think that's a good joined up thinking. One profound policy shift is that heretofore the Housing Bureau is incentivizing through property tax abatement, short-term, 10-year affordability, or through direct financing, tax increment financing, some 60 years of affordability. We think that's insufficient, and this new policy would essentially maintain units affordable in perpetuity for 99 years. And most importantly, as we calibrated the offsets, we wanted to make sure that we were not impeding the market rate development industry. So we very carefully looked at profit and overhead, land cost, development costs, including hard and soft costs, labor and materials, to make sure that we were not overburdening the industry. I'm sure people will comment on that today. With respect to the program recommendations, this applies across the board in the central city and in the mixed-use zones. The graphics of the portions of the city that applies are provided. Since single-family is exempt, we obviously have exempted the majority of the city as a result. The inclusion rates include a initial, in the mixed-use zone, since special concern was voiced at the study session about closing the gap, we believe that it was appropriate to have an initial rate of inclusion of 15% at 80%, and in 2019, that would step up to the standard rate of 20% at 80% of AMI. That allows 2 years for the market to adjust and the residual land values to come into alignment with real costs, since we know there's a lot of speculation in the current land market. There is a deeper affordability option, and that would be an initial rate of 8% of units at 60% of AMI, again stepping up in 2 years, 2019, with 10% of the units at 60% of AMI, which was our original program design all along. We've also come up with an alternative fee schedule, which recognizes that the fee in lieu could be tapered in, and that is before you today as well. So the offsets available as incentives in the mixed-use zone include the 3-to-1 density bonus, as we've discussed, a 10-year property tax exemption on the affordable units only, the exemption of construction excise tax on the affordable units, a waiver of parking requirements, and system development charge waivers on the affordable units if they are indeed under 60% of AMI. That's a very attractive package, as mentioned at the study session. Most cities have only offer FAR, or bonus density incentives. They don't offer direct financing. I worked for Fairfax County, administered the urban county inclusionary zoning program there, and frankly, it was all done with incentive zoning. No money changed hands whatsoever. So this is I think, a very compelling and well-balanced package. I was pleased to see the guest editorial by the Sightline Institute in the Oregonian this weekend, which recognized that balance in this approach is quite important. They didn't, of course, render an opinion as to whether or not it was correctly balanced or not, but they did encourage such balance. So I look forward to hearing the testimony about how we've done today. With respect to the central city, of course, this is a high opportunity area, an area where Portland really distinguishes itself because our central city is home to tens of thousands of people working against type in other large cities where the central cities are often business districts but not 24-hour neighborhoods. So we want to make sure that continues, but the cost of providing such housing is higher because of the high-rise typology. The mandatory inclusionary requirement would apply on day one, February 1st, whereby 20% of the units would be affordable at 80% of AMI, and there would be an affordability option of deeper affordability at 10% at 60% of AMI in the central city. The offsets are somewhat different to recognize the higher cost and typology. Density bonus would apply. The 10-year property tax exemption would apply to all units for sites with a base floor area ratio of 5 or above, which we believe is warranted given the higher cost of development in the central city. The CET, or construction excise tax exemption, would apply on affordable units only, and the system development charge waivers would be made available for units under 60% of AMI. We modeled the issue of property tax incentives, and I believe the county will render an opinion about that today, which I look forward to hearing. With respect to options, we are allowing affordable units to be in new development, which would be our preferred option. There is a payment in lieu of performance, which we must allow, and we've provided several off-site options, which we think are magnificent opportunities for collaboration with nonprofits and for-profits in this community. One is to build new units or dedicated market units as affordable nearby. That location needs to be within a half mile, and it has to be an equal or better opportunity mapping score so that we're not exporting people to inferior locations, essentially creating a disconnect between jobs and housing and disadvantaging people with access to services and shopping. The units must also be comparable in size, quality, and bedroom count. Yes, sir.
What's the clock for meeting that obligation?
is it 3 years? And I think I originally had some language, which I actually wrote, which stipulated that there needed to be a permit pulled, I think, before a C of O was issued for the sending unit property. The panel of experts said oftentimes the capital stack isn't really known at that moment in time, and they urged us to enact some fairly rigorous financial penalties for non-performance. So we're giving people 3 years to perform, but there are some significant financial penalties attached to their non-compliance. The other option that is not mentioned in the slide is that if there is a property at risk of converting to market, an offsite option would allow a developer to extend the affordability of that property for the 99-year term that we talked about earlier. For example, if a tax credit project was at the end of its initial affordability requirement and could be marked to market, a developer could buy the partnership interest, assign that property to a nonprofit, and get credit for doing so as part of their project.
Is it worth considering what happens in the event of a significant change in market conditions, like a huge spike in interest rates or something else? We've been through something like that recently called the Great Recession, where the offsite option no longer pencils out, but we have an interest in maybe converting it to a fee in lieu or something so that we can add it to our toolkit and do affordable housing. Is it worth contemplating a situation where, through no fault of the developer's intentions, they don't meet the 3-year deadline, and we convert it to something where we get the resources and add it to our plan?
I think that's highly likely. We've talked about this as it relates to the building pipeline of some magnitude. I think we're approaching 16,000 units of vested projects that will vest prior to the February 1st date. We know that many of those projects will face an uphill battle with respect to increasing interest rates. They may not convert to market rate. So we want to be flexible and apply the 10% at 60% option to those pipeline projects so that they become potential voluntary inclusionary housing clients of the Housing Bureau. Moreover, we felt that after that pipeline had been sort of emptied out in 3 years, we would need to look again at Title 30 and the calibration, because we know interest rates, labor prices, and materials will all be different then. So we're open to looking at that. The rate of inclusion is in Title 33. That's a much more elaborate review process. Title 30 is more of a ministerial process and can be adjusted quite easily.
Well, let me just state my preference. I strongly support your priority in terms of on-site development. That provides certainty and boosts opportunity. If the fee in lieu kicks in, I'm hoping that there is something of a disincentive to using it, but if it's the only option, we go that route. I think the off-site option is the least attractive. It requires, there's all kinds of variables in terms of market conditions. We can endlessly argue about location and compliance, and I think it puts burdens on the Housing Bureau in terms of oversight. So again, I hope the way it's structured is strongly encouraging that the units go in the new development with a fee in lieu as an alternative, so that money comes to us and we can package it with other resources and actually make sure that the housing is being developed.
I appreciate that. Just for the audience knowledge, they may not have noticed that this year the Design Commission approved a density transfer for the Broadway Tower, which is an office at Columbia and Broadway next to Raven and Rose, the pub. And this is an office with a hotel combined. And in order to demonstrate public benefit for the FAR transfer, there will be 20 affordable housing units built in a 60-unit project immediately to the west on the South Park blocks. Those housing units will be affirmatively and fairly marketed to hotel service workers. So you have a workforce housing nexus between the hotel and the housing, which we think is quite compelling. It will be a candidate for the tax exemption, tax abatement multi-program. So we're already working on things like this. We would like to encourage it. And frankly, although Walt Bowen, the hotel developer, happens to be a housing developer, which is somewhat unique, to his credit, he can do both. But many private developers that are doing perhaps condos or not interested in doing affordable housing, they would most probably with a nonprofit partner to do the off-site housing on an adjacent site. So that concludes my presentation. If there are any further questions, we'd be happy to respond. Nora will be
Okay.
here for the duration.
Questions?
Yeah, I have three questions. I've been struck by the fact that everyone who's contacted our office, whether they're supporters or critics, are united in wanting to make sure that this proposal actually works. So I have three questions that go to the question about will this work as we anticipate. The first is the thousands and thousands of units that are beating the February 1 deadline. We're going to have probably the biggest bull market in multifamily development since I've been on the council. And what we know is that a lot of stuff is being filed that's not cooked. And a lot of folks are going to be scrambling over the 180-day period to complete the application. Ever the optimist, I'm hoping that there's a number of opportunities in that pipeline for the Housing Bureau to sit down with developers and negotiate a voluntary IZ or some enhancement for the public interest. None of us here know where the bureaus are going to land next year, and we haven't begun to lay out the budget process. But it seems to me, with the volume of units in the pipeline and with our goal of trying to negotiate some voluntary IZ in those units that are beating the deadline, you're going to need to have staff available to do that, and the Bureau of Development Services is going to need to have staff. So I want to just plant a seed for you to come forward and tell us what kind of resources do you need to be successful in that enterprise. Because again, we may very well see so many projects beat the February 1 deadline that for the next couple of years, the bulk of the development is done in this city that is not covered by IZ. And if we don't have the staff and the resources to negotiate voluntary deals, we're going to lose a lot of opportunity here. And I'd like to make sure that both the Housing Bureau and the Bureau of Buildings have the adequate staff to do that. That's number one. Number two, at some point today, are we going to get an update on the estimated costs of implementation with an eye towards impact on our budgeting, impact on the county's share of particularly the tax abatements, and as we know, we're still subject to a ceiling there. And then the unique impact of this program in urban renewal districts, where there could be a significant change in how much resources we have in a couple of districts because of this. Are we going to get an update on that today?
I will say with respect to the tax abatements, Multnomah County Chair Deborah Kafori will be here to testify on the tax abatement policy, but she won't be here till 10 o'clock. When she does arrive, we'll take her to the stand.
So my interest in asking this is both to have a sort of a preview of what we're going to have to be thinking about at budget time, but also understand some of the trade-offs. And they're not all costs that come out of our pocket. So I'm particularly interested in the county share, impact on urban renewal, and then what you view as the city share. And the third thing, Kurt, I want to just put on the table, and this goes to some of the folks that we've heard from who aren't sure that this is calibrated the right way. And frankly, I'm not in a position to really opine on that. You've convened a group of experts. We've had a thoughtful process. I'm prepared to move forward on this. But what I'd like to know is, what are the canaries in the tunnel that we need to be keeping an eye on? What data will we be tracking to test whether this is the right package? And at what point in the process would you be, based on the data, potentially coming back to us saying, let's tweak this or tweak that? I'm particularly concerned about development that is on the east side that's under 20 units, which would be contrary to our comp plan and our climate action plan goals. And I'm also, frankly, concerned about the fact that there's so many units in the pipeline that we may not actually have good data overall because of the flood of projects which are going to beat the February 1 deadline. But what I'd like to know before we vote on this is, what data are you going to be tracking? And when will we know whether this is working or not? And what are the indicators that this council needs to monitor going forward, since we all share the goal of ensuring that this works?
Very good.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. And we'll now move to, we have two invited panels. And as I said, when Chair Kafori shows up, we will accommodate her. But the first panel is Vivian Satterfield of Opal Environmental Justice, Lisa Hagens of Service Employees International Union, and John Mulvey of the East Portland Action Plan and the Inclusionary Housing Coalition.
Mr. President, before we begin, I neglected to introduce a companion amendment to my amendment on family-sized units, sort of incorporating everything we said about Title 30 to Title 33.
I'll second that.
Thanks.
Thanks. Okay, Vivian, take it away.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Vivian Satterfield. I'm the Deputy Director at Opal Environmental Justice Oregon, and I'm thankful for this opportunity to speak to you today, and thankful to finally be able to say Portland can and should enact the inclusionary housing proposal before you without delay. Opal's been working at the intersection of transportation, housing, and health for over a decade in our communities. In 2008, we began examining the root causes of housing injustice for communities of color and working-class households. We identified inclusionary zoning as a critical tool used in other jurisdictions to make a community less racially segregated and more economically diverse. Inclusionary housing isn't difficult to understand. It is simply a tool to help maintain diversity and economic stability when housing markets fluctuate. There's only one reason why this tool was banned outright in 1999 at the state level. Profits were valued higher than people. Inclusionary housing has been under consideration in this state from the original ban to our successful repeal of the ban for nearly 2 decades. This includes the ongoing scrutiny of the development industry, which maintains that if we only had more time, we would arrive at a program, likely with an end result that would be more in their favor. Today's consideration is not a surprise. Rather, it has been a long time coming. And as we've waited, we've declared a housing state of emergency. We've documented through the excellent but sobering state of housing reports published by the Housing Bureau how unaffordable and exclusionary, especially along the lines of race, class, and household size, our city has become. We've observed the change in our neighborhoods as block by block, for sale, and new construction signs became ubiquitous in every quadrant. A lot of folks from the advocacy community and their members desperately wanted to be here this morning, but they can't. Some are in Salem sharing stories and furthering policy ideas with our elected representatives to address other aspects of our statewide housing crisis, such as renter protections and rent stabilization. Others are directly impacted by the lack of affordable housing, aren't here because they can't afford to take the morning off work. And then there are those who've been pushed so far to the fringes of our city due to the lack of affordable housing that what would have been a short bus ride down to City Hall to appeal directly to you in person has now become a complicated scheduling endeavor of multiple transit trips. It simply takes too long. We're appealing to every level of government because we must. And despite working with shoestring budgets, despite addressing the multitude of real and pressing threats to our community's livability in this city, we've been successful in unlocking the tools which this council can then use to address affordable housing production and housing choice, like the construction excise tax and inclusionary zoning. We're going back this upcoming legislative session for meaningful renters protections and rent stabilization, and yes, we will succeed there too. Portland's housing crisis is amongst the worst in the nation, while we remain an attractive place for people to move. We must act with a sense of urgency to stop the resegregation of our communities where unaffordable housing is the only option being built. There are claims that this inclusionary housing proposal will stifle and even stop development entirely, that it will exacerbate an ever-worsening housing crisis. These claims are demonstrably false. Simply look to the 500 jurisdictions nationwide where some version of IZ already exists. Buildings are still going up. Resistance to inclusionary housing as a regulatory tool to address what the free market does not provide, again, comes because profits are valued higher than people. We've been prompted throughout this process to ask ourselves, what does a successful policy look like in other cities, and how do we replicate that? We should also ask ourselves, what does failure look like? And honestly, without further delay, it's inaction. Failure is a policy that lets one more day go by where our neighbors are priced out and profits are placed over people. Service workers and hourly wage earners are part of the fabric of Portland and must not be dismissed. Entire communities of color have dwindling places in Portland we can call home. We will know this policy is a failure if it allows rampant racial and economic resegregation to continue. We must ground ourselves in the reality of this type of failure is very real. We have an opportunity to steer Portland in a different direction despite toxic rhetoric at the national level. This city is filled with progressives who believe in inclusion, not exclusion. People who want to move forward, not backward. People who understand history's mistakes and want to learn from them, not repeat them. This current council has been given the opportunity to do so, to move Portland forward from its dark past of exclusion towards a more just future. This policy is based on 40 years of trial and error from across the nation, a process with community-organized forums and presentations informed by expert panels and experienced consultation. It is my opinion that before you today is the best form of inclusionary housing we can enact at this time. I urge you to take action without further delay, maximize the policy as allowable under state law with no additional carve-outs or ramp-up periods. Our movement bears witness to how you vote on this most clear of choices. Will you stand with the profiteers and continue to enrich those at the top? Or will you say enough is enough? We've gone too far and too long without protecting the needs of those trying to find a small foothold of security. Before you is a most modest request, the chance to call home here in the city of Portland for our folks. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. Felicia Higgins?
Hello, President Saltzman, members of the council. Hi, my name is Felicia Higgins. I'm the political director for the Service Employees International Union. We're the largest union in the state of Oregon. We represent 65,000 workers throughout the state and about 11,000 who live in the borders of the city of Portland. It's very clear, I've been before you many times to talk about our workers and where they live versus where they work and what it means for them to get to and from their jobs. I want to start by telling a short story about one of our board members, Caitlin Doherty. She has 2 children. She's worked at Legacy Emmanuel for 20 years. She's a surgical technologist there, which means she makes a good amount of money, actually. She makes about $22 an hour. And she has 2 young children. And Caitlin recently moved and had to move to Clackamas County because she couldn't afford to live in the city of Portland limits, and she makes $22 an hour. And she works at a hospital, which means her hours vary wildly. I think everybody here can agree we would like to have our hospitals open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which means they have to be staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And this has really been a challenge for Caitlin in limiting her options about what shifts she can pick up, how she can get to and from work. And it's also created disruption for Megan, who's in elementary school and has had to move outside of where she goes to school on a regular basis. And we know yesterday was in Salem with Children's First of Oregon, and they were talking about how when a child moves, it costs them a year of school. So the policy that you're looking at and envisioning today affects families like Caitlin in a very real way. It impacts her life and Megan's life and the future of our city in a very real way. We want to keep the workers who work here, close to where they work. I think the Central City Plan in this inclusionary zoning policy is a critical plan for our members who clean the vast majority of the high-rises downtown, who are the security officers who guard those high-rises, who make between $10 and $15 an hour. For them to be able to afford to live anywhere near those commercial zones is just a blessing. And I think this policy goes a long way in really making that happen. They've waited a very long time for the market to correct itself. And that hasn't happened. And so the choice that's happening in front of you today is you taking a step forward again to correct the market. I really want to thank the whole council, but especially Commissioner Saltzman, We have been down in Salem together many times, taking our lumps on this policy from people who may not agree. I know that over the last year, you've been here every day taking your lumps on this policy for the people who may not agree. And I think the process that you've put together to get us to the place where we're at today is frankly years of your dedicated and committed work, and the committed work of your staff. We wholeheartedly hope that the commission can adopt this policy today. Some of the amendments you have in front of you, I think, are also critical to making this policy more workable for working families. I think the amendment that Commissioner Novick has brought forward around expanding the number of bedrooms is really critical and important. I've been to many workers' houses over this city where you have 4, 5, 6 people in a studio, a 1-bedroom, a 2-bedroom apartment, because that's how they afford to live in the city, and that's how they can live even remotely close to where they work. I also think that, today is your chance to live up to the promise of livability that was made, 20 or 30 years ago, before many of you even got into politics, before I got into politics. But that commitment, I think, is still alive and well in the city of Portland, and we've promised a livable city, and that means a couple of things. It means affordable housing, it means good jobs, it means a place where you can live and work close together. And I think today's vote is another commitment and that affirmation of that promise that has attracted development, has attracted business, and has made us the city we are today. So I hope that we can count on your votes to keep that promise to Portlanders. Thank you.
Thank you, Felisa.
Felisa, none of us up here like to disappoint you, but I just want to clarify something. Today's the first reading of an ordinance.
Yes.
So the vote will be next week, and it'll also allow the entire council to participate. But so it's scheduled for next week because we have to let a week go between first and second reading. But that's not because
Thank you, Commissioner Fish.
we're disregarding your challenge. So
But there's enough votes today, right now. Just
We'll vote on amendments today. Yeah.
on the amendments.
great.
John Mulvey.
Good morning, Commissioners. It's a pleasure to be here with you this morning. My name is John Mulvey. I'm a member of the East Portland Action Plan Housing Committee, and I've been closely following the inclusionary housing issue for more than 7 years. I've also been severely rent burdened, at times spending more than 90% of my monthly income on rent. And when that became unsustainable, for the past year, I've been homeless, living on the streets of the city of Portland. For the past year, I've risen early from whatever doorway I've been sleeping in, went to the nearest Fred Meyer men's room to clean up, and ridden my bike to the monthly 3-hour meetings of the panel of experts, the group that you charged with advising you on the creation of Portland's inclusionary housing policy. As you know, local governments in Oregon were prohibited under state law from enacting inclusionary housing, despite it being a fairly non-controversial program in hundreds of jurisdictions nationwide. I've personally had dozens of conversations with legislators and been an active member of the statewide coalition that finally overturned that legal preemption earlier this year. The state preemption was lifted over the objections of the state's home builders. The developers' objections led to compromise legislation in which the state imposed a series of statutory restrictions, including limits on what cities can require and mandates on incentives that developers must be given for compliance. No other state micromanages how local governments must structure their IH programs, and these restrictions, written by the developers, ensured that Oregon's program would be unavailable to help the lowest income Oregonians, and it also renders large geographic areas of our state essentially off limits to the IH requirements, including much of East Portland. Last spring, at your direction, the Housing Bureau began monthly meetings of the panel of housing experts, most of whom were for-profit developers. The essential question that this panel was trying to answer was how to structure the incentive package so as to avoid inhibiting the creation of new homes in Portland, both regulated affordable and market rate. Everyone agrees with the need to strike the right balance of requirements and incentives to harness our city's dramatic growth and unprecedented increases in housing costs. The overwhelming majority of the time spent by the panel was devoted to answering that question. The Housing Bureau brought in David Rosen and Associates, a consulting firm that's advised on these identical policy issues in dozens of other jurisdictions. DRA spent hour after hour with members of the for-profit development community, hearing input on the assumptions that would underlie their economic analysis. Every cost, from parking to FAR bonuses to stick versus concrete construction, was debated at length so that the end product would reflect the right balance between public need and development realities. But a funny thing happened on the way to the council. A group of developers, not all of them, decided to abandon that attempt at balance and instead demand that the public fully offset their costs under the inclusionary housing program. Since the PHB released its proposal in September, we've seen a full-blown effort by this group to convince the public and this council to provide full public funding to meet their so-called development gap. Their argument is that the city should abandon the independent economic analysis that it paid for and instead use their analysis, which perhaps not surprisingly shows that they should be given millions in additional tax abatements and fee waivers. I was in this room back in the summer when you referred the housing bond measure to the voters, and at that time, a couple of members of this council mentioned that before going to the voters to help solve the housing crisis, the city's leadership would ensure that other constituencies be part of the solution too. You mentioned inclusionary housing explicitly as a way of making sure that the development community, who have done so well while I and other Portlanders slept in parks and vacant lots, would have skin in the game. It appears that they were absent that day because they're here today not to put their skin in this game, but to demand their pound of flesh from the taxpayers. I urge you not to give it to them. Inclusionary housing has succeeded in creating thousands of homes for low-income people nationwide. There is zero evidence to support claims that it impacts housing supply or drives up market rate rents. Those claims stem from an erroneous assumption, which is that housing developers base their price on their costs. They do not. As your consultant, David Rosen, told you 2 weeks ago at the work session, and this is a quote, "The cost of producing real estate is not related to its price." He meant that for-profit housing developers set prices by what the market will bear, not by a simplistic cost plus profit analysis. Individuals do that too. If you've ever sold a home, I'm guessing that you did not sit down and figure out how much the house cost you, how much you've spent to improve it, tacked on a modest profit, and set your price based on that. Of course you didn't. You looked at comparables in the market, and you picked an amount that you thought you could expect to get in the marketplace at that time. That's what for-profit housing developers do too. That's precisely why a robust inclusionary housing program is so important for Portland right now. Enacting Commissioner Saltzman's proposal would harness the windfall profits that our wildly inflated housing prices are creating and put them to work to protect and strengthen our city. Without it, what was once called the most livable city in America becomes simply a crass real estate opportunity in which investors monetize our livability and walk away. That's not the way we do things here. Portland Way is to solve our housing crisis as a community, and a strong inclusionary housing program is an essential tool to doing that. So I hope you will support the strongest possible program, and I'm happy to answer any questions if
Thank
you'd
you.
like.
Any questions for the panel? Okay, thank you all very much. And I'll call up our next panel, Dr. George Galster, who has a PhD in economics from MIT, presently serves as the Clarence Hilbury Professor of Urban Affairs at Wayne State University. Dennis Allen, representing Locus, a coalition of developers and investors, and Dr. Lisa Bates of Portland State University. Welcome. Dr. Galster, you're up first.
Thank you very much. It's my honor and privilege to participate in the discussions of this important proposed ordinance, which I believe will positively affect my new hometown for generations to come. Based on my over 40 years of analyzing metropolitan housing markets and reviewing the scholarly research, rigorously investigating the effects of inclusionary housing policies, I strongly endorse the proposed ordinance. Inclusionary housing ordinances were first enacted in the United States over 40 years ago and since have wildly proliferated both in geography and in their programmatic specifics. They're now in operations in hundreds of cities and counties across the United States, including fast-growing Portland-sized places like Denver and Minneapolis. Despite its long-standing track record and considerable number of scholarly evaluations, the debate over inclusionary housing here in Portland, from my view, has been shrouded in half-truths and myths, some unfortunately advanced by self-appointed experts who have purported to summarize scholarly research, but in fact have misrepresented these findings. I know that some people believe that there are no such things as facts anymore. Needless to say, I strongly dispute that. On the contrary, respected researchers whose methods have passed exacting peer-reviewed publications have come to a consensus about what inclusionary housing ordinances, such as the one being considered in Portland, will in fact do. They will, number one, increase the supply of housing affordable to moderate income households. Two, they will not reduce the rate of new housing construction. And number three, they will not raise overall housing prices, only perhaps, if at all, in the luxury end of the housing market. Now, my task this morning is to explain briefly why researchers have come to these conclusions. And I would add for the council that my full testimony includes the citations of the scholarly literature that I will be summarizing. I shall proceed by debunking 4 myths that keep cropping up in the discussion over the proposed Portland ordinance. Perhaps some people think that by repeating these myths loudly and often enough, they will acquire the veneer of truth. Myth number 1, inclusionary housing will slow the production of housing. Now, this could only occur if the proposed ordinance made developing housing absolutely unprofitable, not simply less profitable. Now, will this ordinance make housing unprofitable? No. Even with this ordinance, developers will make handsome profits for 3 reasons. 1, the demand for luxury housing is growing so quickly that developers can't keep pace with it as is. 2, thus they can raise their prices for their luxury customers to offset their loss of revenue from the set-aside units. And 3, on top of that, they will receive a variety of generous financial incentives from the city, which we've just heard. Now, research from the scholarly community shows that there is virtually no impact on total housing production with the sort of inclusionary housing policy that Portland is proposing. Key features being mandatory, but with strong financial incentives. Why? It's simple. Developers as a group are neither timid nor stupid, and they're going to read the regulations and quickly figure out a way to tweak their projects to still make a lot of money. And frankly, if for some reason the development community here in Portland proves me wrong in my generalizations, I'm confident that many developers from around the country who are experienced with inclusionary housing will come into Portland and eat their lunch. Myth number 2, inclusionary housing will slow the filtering down of housing to moderate income households and thus hurt them inadvertently. I think just the opposite is likely. This myth is based on the fiction that right now we're building housing faster than the number of households is growing. Now, under that fiction, this supposed excess supply of newly built luxury housing would allow some Portlanders to move up into that housing, therefore vacating their middle-quality housing and allowing their former house to filter down to others who are less well off. Unfortunately for this myth, for the foreseeable future, there is no chance that the construction at the luxury end of the Portland market will exceed demand, and thus there won't be any filtering down of these dwellings. By contrast, the inclusionary housing ordinance will provide moderate income dwellings directly and quickly, not waiting for filtering to come into play in the far distant future. Myth number 3. Inclusionary housing will raise housing prices overall. Not surprisingly, with little impact on overall housing production, there will be little impact on housing prices overall. However, research has shown that if there is an overall price impact, it's due to increases in one piece of the market, the price for luxury dwellings. And that's because in that sector, developers in some places pass on some of the costs of setting aside their moderate income dwellings to their higher income plus customers. The same research shows that there are slight decreases in the prices for moderate and lower end housing. Myth number 4, inclusionary housing will generate few affordable units. Few compared to what? Right now, the construction of buildings with over 20 units in Portland is generating 0 affordable housing. Now, certainly, this ordinance is not a panacea for Portland's housing affordability challenges, but it's an important component of the solution. Research shows that thousands of affordable dwellings have been created by inclusionary housing programs like the one proposed here in Portland. So, members of council, when you bust the myths with hard-headed facts, the conclusions are clear. Inclusionary housing ordinances, such as the one being considered here in Portland, number 1, will increase the supply of housing affordable to moderate income households. 2, will not reduce the rate of new housing construction. And number 3, will not raise overall housing prices, only perhaps in the luxury end of the market. But let's face it, like any public policy, inclusionary housing ordinances will produce benefits and costs. Now, I'm confident that the benefits will far outweigh the costs, but of equal importance here is who will reap the benefits and who will pay the costs. I think we all know who will bear the costs, as they are the ones who are opposing this ordinance. Developers and landowners will reap slightly lower profits as a result of this ordinance. Probably higher income households like myself will bear the costs because they will face slightly higher housing prices at the luxury end of the market. And in all fairness, all Portlanders will bear some of the costs through the foregone property tax and fee revenues as part of the city's compensation plan. Well, who will be the beneficiaries of the ordinance? Moderate income households who occupy the newly built set-aside affordable dwellings, even lower income households who occupy newly developed subsidized housing that could be generated through the in lieu fees or the off-site requirements, and obviously all Portland citizens will benefit. Those are the people who believe we should strive, we've heard this morning, for more economic diversity in our neighborhoods, more affordable housing for our neediest citizens. Portlanders as a whole will reap sizable social, economic, and environmental benefits from the mixed income communities that will result. This is what a fair, progressive housing policy should do. It should ask the advantaged with the greatest ability to pay to bear most of the costs of a policy that primarily benefits the disadvantaged and those with the less ability to pay. I support the proposed ordinance because the gains will outweigh the costs, and the costs will primarily be borne by those who can most afford it. This inclusionary housing ordinance is no panacea for Portland's affordable housing challenges, but it's an important component that is both effective and equitable, and I strongly urge its adoption by this council. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Dr. Galster. Dennis Allen?
Good morning, Commissioners. My name's Dennis Allen. I'm here today as one of the founders of Oregon Locus. We're an affiliate of Smart Growth America's National Coalition of Responsible Developers and Investors. We started Oregon Locus to be a helpful voice in the data that was being out there and the analysis that's happening in housing affordability for all incomes. We strongly believe inclusionary zoning can be one of several different programs that together provide a range of housing, and I think we agree with most of what was said prior to me and what will come later on today. As a matter of fact, I just came from Washington, D.C. yesterday, where I was on our National Steering Committee for Locus, and our number one priority in our strategic plan for 2017 is how to make these areas that have become so popular across the country more economically obtainable for everybody. It's an issue that we need to deal with together as a community. You're going to hear lots of opinions in the coming few hours, mine included, with lots of data and facts that are supporting opinions either way. The central issue I think that's important that you know is that whatever program we put in place has to encourage housing production. And it can be very bad if it discourages housing production. I know that you know that. It needs to work well with all the other important growth, design, and sustainability goals and regulations we just put in place. Many of them are very good, but we want to make sure that they're just not going to stack up in a way that will, again, stagnate housing supply. We've also got changes in the comp plan that are coming up. We need to fully understand how these will affect housing production as well. Everybody's right, inclusionary housing programs have been done in many, many cities across the country. There is fewer number that have done a mandatory program. Most of them are voluntary, but there is some that have done a mandatory program. One of the things we found, there wasn't a lot of data that was supporting that, so I actually just submitted for you, and you could read later. We commissioned a study of all of the large cities that have done inclusionary housing programs, specifically a mandatory program, because a lot of them that have done are much smaller cities. They don't build a lot of multifamily or larger apartment buildings. So I think it's important to note what the larger ones that are similar to us have done. And I think that you will see there's many of those programs, but what we're doing here in Portland is more wide-ranging than any of those other cities have done, meaning rental and for sale, all areas, all building types. We're doing something that hasn't been done before. That's great. It's exciting. Portland can be a leader like we've done on many, many different policies over the years. We just have to be careful that we get it right, and it can be a cautionary tale if we don't. So I think in summary, we want to say that we want to start with a more measured inclusionary housing program that can be adjusted over time and see what the market supports. And so Oregon Locus, we've offered up 4 amendments to the inclusionary housing proposal, which will start Portland on both a confident and measured footing, keeping production up and growing more and more affordable housing as time moves forward. Locus's executive director, Mike Kingzella, is going to come up here in a little bit, and he'll share the details of those 4 amendments in his upcoming testimony. So we look forward to our continued support and working together. We've been open book from the start. We're happy to meet with anybody else and talk about the programs, the assumptions, the economists that have been there before, and be open book like we have in the past about what can and can't be done. And I want to thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
I have one quick question. I'm going to go back to something I said earlier. I don't want to concede that 15 or 20,000 units in the pipeline are going to be exempt from this program. So, but our hands are tied. If applications come in before February 1st and people play by the rules, they would not be covered by this. So my question is, do you have any thoughts as to how the city could use either friendly persuasion or other parts of its toolkit to bring developers to the table who would otherwise be exempt?
Yeah, I do, and I think it's an important one to note. I'm worried about that as well. You could have 2-3 years of that supply. I mean, that's historical supply. Usually we're around 5,000-6,000 units. So at 15 or so, we're 3 times. So that could be 3 years before something happens. And then, as you know, when a project comes into planning, there's a couple years more of that. So it could be 4 or 5 years before we see one of these mandatory affordable units. So the question is, how do we incentivize to use? Now, we're using in our projects, 100% of our projects in Portland, the existing voluntary multi-program. We think it's a great program. We think it's important to support affordable housing and get it in the buildings that we're building. So how do we do that? I think your idea of making sure we have staff support that can be out there and sort of negotiating with the developers that are in the pipeline and how you get some of that in. Is there perhaps an idea of giving a 1-to-1 offset? If you do something now and one of yours that's in process, do you get some offset in one that you would do after the fact? I don't know what that looks like, but how do we think creatively about these ideas? We're willing to help and work on that.
So I personally don't want to see an erosion of the current date because it's just going to encourage another thousands of units to get in before the deadline. And the multi-program is limited. Multi-program results in a 10-year public asset, not as Dan is proposing, a 99-year public asset. So what I would ask you to do is to perhaps give us in writing some thoughts as to how we might approach those that are in the unit, in the pipeline, that would otherwise not be covered by this, because that's something that I think we all have an interest in pursuing, independent of this policy. Otherwise, we're going to allow, as you say, the next 3 years of development could be otherwise exempt from this, and I don't want to see that happen. But I'm not satisfied with the multi-program being the default,
Fair
particularly in
point.
light
So-
of what this is proposing.
We'll put our minds to it and see if we can come up with something.
Dr. Bates?
Actually, I had one question for Mr. Allen. Mr. Allen, I apologize, I can't remember. Were you part of the quote expert panel?
No,
Okay, but you do follow their deliberations?
correct.
Actually, it's good to see both of you up here at one time. Dr. Bates has told me that, and I think that Director Krieger reiterated this earlier, that when the Housing Bureau tried to figure out whether this program would be viable, they looked at construction costs, and at every point along the line, they took a fairly conservative, in other words, a high estimate of construction costs. And they looked at a large data set and concluded that based on that large data set and conservative estimates all along the line, then this program would be successful without suppressing housing production. Lucas has produced a list of
Steve, your mic keeps going in and out, which means there's people that are hearing impaired won't be able to. So do we have should we replace it?
kind of flickering.
It just means that some of our audience can't hear the proceeding, so let's fix that first.
Doesn't sound like it.
Yeah, I don't think it's worked for years.
Try another one.
Is that better? So Lucas has put together.
No. Steve, maybe if you move one seat over.
Take a man.
We did a big technology upgrade, and so nothing works now.
Does this work?
You push the button?
No. It's on mute. Does this work?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and Locus put together sort of a list of either actual or sample projects and that raise concerns about whether this proposal would restrict development. I just want you to sort of address the argument that's been made and that Dr. Bates is going to make again, that this proposal was based on looking at a broad data set and making very conservative assumptions.
Yeah, well, I think the work that has been done prior by both DRA and Eco Northwest is really good. They had a lot of data. They reached out to many of us in the marketplace to get numbers on costs and everything else, and recognize it's hard. You're trying to put a few programs in a blanket program across every different property type and zone and building type in the city. That's really hard to do. The key difference, the only main difference between what we came up with in our numbers and what I think the DRA proposals was land price. And again, that's really hard to do. How do you get your numbers? Do you take some average set of over the last 5 years? Do you take different pieces and points in time? There's always not data transactions that happen in different spots of the city. And what we saw, that was the main difference between the level of inclusion rate we're suggesting and the higher one, is that the land price that they used is just a lot lower. And so what that would surprise is that the land price has to come down a lot to get back to the numbers to support what's presented today. And so our concern is that while that may happen, it also may not happen. If you have a land seller whose highest and best use is something else, or the current income on the property is more than that, then they don't have to sell, and that means that we can't build anything. So again, we want to be aligned. We want to try to build as much as we can and include in those units we're building with the mandatory program affordable units.
How big a data set was your estimate of land prices based on?
We had about 20 of our current and existing projects, and then also reached out to some of the brokers and others that we all deal with to find out what the current prices are. And we can get that information for you if you'd like. I think we've submitted some of it.
Go ahead, Dr. Bates.
Thank
And then we'll take Chair Kafori after this panel.
Thank you, Commissioner. We know that our resources are inadequate. We know that our housing policy is inadequate. Fewer than 1 in 4 income-eligible households get the very limited housing subsidies that exist in our country. And in Portland, we have, very importantly, focused resources on those experiencing homelessness and extremely low-income families. Those are critical needs. At the same time, the burden of housing costs is being felt increasingly by these low and moderate income households that would be covered by the inclusionary housing policy. And at this point, about 2/3 of Portland renter households between the 50 to 80% area median income range are paying too much for their housing, their cost burden. So we know that we need to really carefully marshal resources and we need to carefully leverage public dollars, especially now, as the city will become the bulwark really against funding cuts from the federal level. We're going to be the place for progressive action and for solving the kinds of problems and challenges that cities face with inequity and affordable housing. And the need to carefully leverage public resources is the reason that cities and counties have innovated with the inclusionary zoning tool to use the efficiency of the private development sector to build units that are affordable and to do that alongside of market rate units, creating mixed income communities. And right now, we're seeing cities move to add this tool or strengthen this tool. From Seattle, Denver, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., New York, to recognize the capacity of the development industry in a time when economic recovery and rising demand for urban living have created a development boom and huge increases in property values. These policies and those in hundreds of other jurisdictions are following the research-identified best practices of mandatory inclusion, on-site preference, and offsets including density bonuses and limited parking. And in these cities, as Dr. Galster described from our research record, developers do adapt their practices to continue to provide housing supply generally and affordable units directly. It's really unfortunate that Portland cannot quickly adopt these best practices that we've known about in the housing policy world for quite a long time due to the state preemption. But even as the IZ Coalition was working in Salem with the legislature and working compromising with counterparts in the development industry, the city of Portland recognized inclusionary housing as a critical tool. It's embedded into the comprehensive land use plan, a plan which has been lauded and awarded for its commitment to equity and anti-displacement. It's time now to move forward into the implementation stage. The process has been extensive, as you've heard. After the many months developing the compromises that set the parameters for the program in Salem, the panel of experts, along with the Housing Bureau staff, planning staff, and DRA and Eco Northwest consultants, spent many multi-hour meetings working together to understand the policy goals, to understand using numbers from industry experts, developers here in Portland, and I would note, including pulling the actual land prices paid in transaction records to look for land prices, to develop a model that addresses cost offsets. And DRA experts with long knowledge from a variety of urban areas about how land markets adjust, how developers adjust to new regulations, I think worked to create and build a policy which has been further negotiated to have the best chance of succeeding at creating units at 60% AMI, at 80% AMI, without negatively impacting our housing supply. The reality is that we don't have crystal balls. No one builds the same development twice. We have to work from estimates, from prototypes, from projections, and that work was conservative in its assumptions, and again, occurred within a context of extensive conversation with private industry actors. It's true that we don't formulate policy so that every firm can continue to work in exactly the same way that they work today. changes happen to the regulatory environment, the policy environment, the larger markets that we don't control. And using their creativity, their savvy, firms adjust to new conditions. There will be an adjustment period for this policy, certainly in response. That adjustment is delayed by the rush to permit that we've been talking about. By the way, that's one of those ways in which firms adjust to new policies. They try to get in under the wire. That's how market actors act in savvy ways. And I would argue that while our economic analysis can tell us a lot about the costs and benefits of the policy, their differential impacts across different groups of people, that to judge them, we need to think as a community based on our values. And I would like to suggest that there's another group of people who have to adjust to market conditions, and that is families and households living here in Portland. And the way that families adjust when housing costs become too high is that they reduce their expenditures on other necessities, such as food and healthcare. They squeeze into smaller spaces and experience health impacts from living in poor quality homes. They move further from their jobs. They move their children's schools to great detrimental impact. They live with the uncertainties of the market, the possibility of losing their home because of price increases in an unregulated market. Those are the kinds of adjustments that families with low and moderate incomes in Portland are making right now. And I think we need to consider those and balance those as we talk about the opportunity to have long-lasting affordable units in our city, in every development, in many of our neighborhoods, as we talk about ways that the market adjusts. Thank you.
Thank you all. Okay. Now we'd like to call up Multnomah County Chair Deborah Kafori. Morning. Thanks for being here.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm Deborah Kafori, our Multnomah County Chair. Appreciate this opportunity today. Earlier this year, Commissioner Dan Saltzman and I, along with many people in this room, went to the legislature and asked them to remove the ban on inclusionary zoning so that our community could come together and craft a common sense solution. I think that the proposal you have in front of you today does that. It balances the need for projects to pencil with the deep need in our community for more affordable housing. And I believe that it will lead to the development of hundreds of new units of housing where we need them the most, in neighborhoods with good schools, neighborhoods with grocery stores, and neighborhoods with parks and community centers. The Housing Bureau has worked hard to put together a program that will work. And Commissioner Saltzman and I have been meeting regularly to identify how to pay for the subsidies that we will need to provide under the law. In the past, we've had an annual cap on property tax abatements for affordable housing of $3 million. And what I understand that we're looking at today is to rethink how we calculate that cap, tracking it over the course of 5 years instead of 1. This will allow the inclusionary housing program to be responsive to the market and ensure that the subsidy is available when we need it. But it will also ensure that this program won't lead to further reductions in property tax revenue for the city, the county, or school districts. If you pass this, which I hope that you do, in January, I will work with Commissioner Saltzman to pass a complementary ordinance at the county, giving the city the authorization it needs under the state law to administer this program. I love Portland. I grew up here and I'm raising my family here because of the spirit of cooperation and dedication to doing the right thing that runs through each of us. We as a community believe that when we are working in common cause, we can do great things. But for far too many Portlanders, this isn't a place where their children will realize their dreams. It's a place that's too expensive to afford. Low vacancy rates, soaring rents, and wholesale evictions are displacing people from the very neighborhoods where they've lived for generations. The root causes are as entrenched as they are well known. poverty caused by an economy that cuts working people out, a federal government more interested in partisan gridlock than getting things done, and a history of institutional racism that shut people out of homeownership because of the color of their skin. None of these things will be solved overnight with this inclusionary housing program, and no one should expect it to. But what this program will do is make sure that we have truly affordable units in neighborhoods that are rapidly gentrifying. It will make sure that the people who built this city will have a place to live in it. And it will prove that we are still a community that can come together and help each other out when we really need it. Thank you for your work, and thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, can I ask a couple questions?
Sure.
Um,
No, I'm sorry, I've got to go.
So our independent budget office has given us a range of costs for this. And it's hard to get precision here, but some of the costs are indirect and some are direct. But we have a suite of programs here, abatements, waiver, STC waivers, bonuses, CET waiver, and parking. In the short term, what happens if, since this is becoming sort of a multi-program on steroids, what happens if we bump up against the cap of $3 million? What will happen in the short term if we hit that ceiling?
Well, what we're looking at is doing a 5-year rolling so that that won't happen. But I mean, I don't think you can predict in the future. If this program is wildly successful, then I think we come back and have a conversation about how we increase the cap or how we make sure that there are, that there is the subsidies necessary. To me, this is our number one priority in our community right now, is making sure that we have housing affordable for people who are living here. And there's going to have to be trade-offs and there's going to have to be prioritization, but putting money into affordable housing is and we've all worked really hard to pass the bond. Congratulations to us, but we still need more.
So one of the things that I learned when you and I worked on the Big Look years ago and the updates to the multi-program is that despite all the powers that you have in your office, you also have to bring the county assessor into the conversation if there's a tax abatement.
Mm-hmm.
So A, if we have to lift the cap, that's a legislative action, but B, the county assessor has to go along with any proposal to waive property taxes, and the county assessor, as we learned, doesn't work for you or us, reports to an agency in Salem.
Mm-hmm.
So is your sense that these are all details to be worked out and that you're comfortable going forward, even though it may be that any given year we're going to have to be creative in how to pay for it?
I know that Commissioner Saltzman's office and the Housing Bureau have been working closely with our tax assessor at Multnomah County so that he is well aware of the program and has given his support to making sure that it works.
I guess the other thing is, you mentioned in passing potentially some change in the law to allow us to administer inclusionary housing. What were you referring to?
I mean, just this, what you're talking about today, this program.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Kafoury, two comments, actually, not questions, one serious and one lighter. It's always very poignant to see you here advocating for affordable housing, which is a great cause of your mother's, and we all miss her very much. The second thing is, I don't want what you said about loving Portland to be used against you as the county chair, so I just wanted to give you an opportunity to also state that you love Gresham, Troutdale, Fairview, and Wood Village equally much.
Exactly. And Sylvia Island and our friends out in Corbett as well, yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here. Okay, now we're going to move to public testimony. And do we have people signed up, I assume?
We have a total of 56.
56? Okay, we'll start out at 3 minutes, but at some point, we're probably going to have to go to 2 minutes or even 1 minute. And if you could call up the first three people.
First three are Mike Kinsella, Scott Cuny, and Carol Chan. And they'll be followed by Michael Blewis-Telta, Shannon Singleton, and Noel Mickelberry.
Great, welcome. And as I said, you'll have 3 minutes. And if you just all you need to do is give us your name. And there will be, and there's a clock in front of you, and that will go off at, when you have 30 seconds left, you'll hear a beep. Okay, we'll start with you, sir.
Commissioner Saltzman, members of City Council, my name is Mike Kinsella, and I am here today as Executive Director of Oregon Locus. Oregon Locus is the local affiliate of Smart Growth America's Coalition of Responsible Developers and Investors. We support dense, walkable neighborhoods that are economically, socially, and environmentally sustainable. As part of that mission, we support inclusionary housing as a tool to increase affordability throughout Portland, where it helps meet our growing housing needs for all affordability ranges. There are 4 key amendments needed to ensure that the new inclusionary housing program encourages adequate housing production and creates more affordable housing units. 1, collapse the 2 proposed Central City Zone inclusionary rate and incentive packages into one, using the more robust incentive package that includes a density bonus, tax abatement on all units, CET exemption on affordable units, and SDC waivers on affordable units at 60% AMI. This will help ensure that critical areas of Central City with 4.0 FAR, such as the post office or Rose Quarter, are not underbuilt where high-rise density would otherwise happen. 2, lower the inclusion rates to better calibrate to the incentive packages currently proposed, especially where there isn't full abatement, such as mixed-use zones. We appreciate the great demand on resources, so working with the offsets proposed at the work session, the inclusion rate needs to be set lower to avoid slowing housing production, a concern shared by the Planning and Sustainability Commission and the City Budget Office. In the handout in front of you, we listed the alternative inclusion rates that are supported by the proposed incentive packages in each of the zones. Third, add language regarding Central City master plans or development agreements where the city deems better affordable housing results can be achieved. And last, 4th, ramp up the inclusion rate as the market supports the increase. We realize that there may be concerns that if the initial rate is set low, it won't ever be increased. If council starts with the inclusion rates we propose, Oregon Locus is committed to supporting a measurable, market-based threshold for increasing the inclusion rate. As Commissioner Saltzman has noted in the past, there will always be a starting place for any policy and adjustments we'll need to follow. Today, we strongly urge that the council err on the side of housing production and adopt these 4 amendments. An amended inclusionary housing program will produce more housing overall, including affordable, and continue to build SDC and CET funds for more deeply affordable housing. Thank you for your work, and I'm happy to answer any questions about amendments or the model we use to calibrate the inclusion rates.
Thank you. Sir?
Actually, Mr. President, I do have one question. On the issue of the ramp up, isn't there a concern that given that we have a really hot market right now, if we have a lower inclusion rate for the next few years, then we might be losing out on lots and lots of affordable units? And then when the market cools down, when we have the higher inclusion rate, it won't matter as much?
I think part of our rationale for ramping up the inclusion rate is to start with what the market will bear today based on the current program structure recommendation, and then ramp it up as the market naturally absorbs those impacts pursuant to the literature from Lincoln Land Institute and others.
And also, Commissioner Saltzman, I had meant to discuss with you the first proposed amendment, collapsing the 2 PHP proposed Central City Zone inclusionary rate and incentive packages into one, because I heard about this the other day. It didn't sound like an obviously crazy idea. I was just curious if that's something you've considered and might consider supporting.
We can have the Bureau come back up and talk about that after testimony. Okay, go ahead, sir.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Scott Cuny. I am a millennial, I'm a renter, and I'm a real estate developer. I'm 29 years old, and I'm just beginning to pave a career in real estate development. I'm currently working for a small apartment developer in Portland, but I rent in Vancouver, and I commute to downtown Portland with the approximate 20,000 other commuters. I don't live in Portland because market rents are too high, and I refuse to place myself into a housing burden where I spend more than 3% of my income on housing expenses. I support the concept of inclusionary housing, but believe that amendments to the current proposal are needed to achieve the desired intentions of the policy. I fear that the policy as is could alter my career path with unintended consequences. I'm not alone in my fears. Both the Planning and Sustainability Commission and the city's own budget office have expressed concern about the currently proposed inclusionary housing proposal and its effects on housing. The city of Portland is having a housing crisis, and though it is important to address the pressing problem facing us today, it is equally important to consider the long-term implications 10, 20, and even 99 years down the road. What happens if development of apartments decreases or stalls? Housing units that may have been built might not be built. What happens if a 30-unit apartment building subject to inclusionary housing, for example, now turns into a retail center or industrial warehouse? The loss to the city of Portland might be those 30 housing units. And if it's not just housing units that might be lost, across the board, equally or quality blue-collar jobs in the construction trades could be affected. There might not be as much work if the industry stalls. What happens to these households? There are a lot of moving pieces, and in my opinion, the way to achieve a win-win situation during our crisis is to move forward with a moderate policy that ramps up over time. To use construction vernacular, let's measure twice and cut once. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you. Ma'am, welcome. Just give us your name.
My name is Carol Chan. Good morning, commissioners. My name is Carol Chan, and I'm an outreach associate at APANO, the Asian Pacific Network of Oregon. APANO is a statewide grassroots organizing and advocacy group that unites Asian and Pacific Islanders to work for social justice. Through our community organizing, APANO has heard hundreds of stories from our members about families who are having to move even outside of the state in order to find housing that they can afford. One of our members recently shared a story in which her 6-year-old son is having nightmares and is begging his parents not to buy a car and instead to save money to buy a house. With every notice on the door, the son has a meltdown, thinking that it is an eviction notice. If the landlord continues to raise the rent 10% each year, the family will be pushed out and they will lose their support system in the school and community. If they have to move, we know that his family will not be able to find a new apartment they can afford in the same neighborhood. And each one of them standing behind me has a story to share about their struggle to find housing. Families are having to choose between buying a much-needed car to get to work and paying the rapidly rising rents. The lack of affordable housing in Portland is harming the health and well-being of children and families, and City Council must take action. Obviously, the housing crisis requires a package of different strategies, and inclusive housing is just a part of that solution. But it is important that we get this part right. APANO strongly supports an inclusionary housing program that ensures development will still occur, but that does not create an unearned windfall profit for developers, and does not take away resources from serving households below 30% median family income. We recognize that developers are mobilizing a powerful and paid opposition to raise doubts and fears about the impacts of this inclusionary housing approach. At APANO, we urge you to look past the paid interest and to listen to the voices of the diverse families whose hard work are part of what makes Portland a vibrant city. Many of our API families are being forced to move to neighborhoods where there are few public amenities to access to jobs and opportunities. Inclusionary housing ensures that families of all income levels can live in opportunity-rich neighborhoods. Building a city that welcomes and protects all of its residents requires a comprehensive approach, and inclusionary zoning is one piece of this comprehensive strategy. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all for being here. Okay, next three.
Are Michael Telta, I believe it is, Shannon Singleton, and Noel Mickleby. And they'll be followed by 8, 9, and 10, Bob Grossman, Bev Logan, and Inga Fisher-Williams.
Okay, welcome. Again, you have 3 minutes, and just give us your name, and there's a clock in front of you. We'll start with you, sir.
Great, good morning. My name is Michael Tete. I'm the CEO at the Community Cycling Center. The Community Cycling Center is a nonprofit organization founded in 1994 that helps people from all walks of life access their community by bicycle. We believe that all Portlanders, regardless of income or background, should have the opportunity to experience the joy, freedom, and health benefits of bicycling. I'm here today to strongly urge you to move forward on developing a courageous, inclusionary housing program that allows Portland's residents to access the opportunities we are all actively supporting in our communities. I would imagine that you can hear the consistent themes from those that have provided testimony in advance today, and you will see that housing and transportation are clearly the work that we need Portland City Council's continued leadership on. Over this past July, we partnered with a community organizer and a health worker, Laquita Langford, and a clothes designer in Ignorant Reflections to create a Gentrification is Weird ride. It described how communities of color have been displaced in Portland's history, from Vanport to North Portland and beyond. Over the past 3 years alone, we have seen rents in Portland neighborhoods increase by as much as 10% per year. That is weird. The future of our city's housing inventory simply cannot continue along the path of recent trends if we truly wish to support the city of Portland's equity goals. We will realize that inclusionary housing is only one tool that we need in order to build affordable housing. It is an important one and one that we have to design really well. I can appreciate the fact that today is certainly not the end of the discussion around inclusionary housing and what we're going to do in order to take care of the state of emergency that we have in our housing. It is instead just the beginning. I would urge you to build pathways to providing access to opportunities throughout our city. I want to thank you for your time and leadership.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, Commissioners. My name is Noelle Mickelberry. I'm the Executive Director of Oregon Walks. We are the state's pedestrian advocacy organization, and we work to ensure that walking is safe, convenient, and attractive for everyone. People often comment that this kind of work must be easy in Portland. It's so walkable, and there's so many crosswalks. And if we weren't focused on the everyone part of our mission, that might be the case. Because of gentrification, skyrocketing rents, and a history of underinvestment in parts of our transportation system, walkable neighborhoods are only available to those with the money to afford living there. And we are creating a segregated city when it comes to access. How can kids get to school safely? How can families get to the grocery store? How do we get to work every day? If we are continually squeezing those who have the least amount of options and quite often have to risk their lives to meet their basic needs. Walkable and connected communities are a privilege in this city, as you are twice as likely to be hit and killed while walking in our low-income neighborhoods. We saw evidence of this just last week as 2 people were hit and killed walking to work or home from work and walking in their neighborhoods on Outer Division. Our low-income communities and communities of color are suffering while the other half thrives. We are in a state of emergency when it comes to our housing access and affordability, and when it comes to who can live in the types of neighborhoods that we pride ourselves in. We have to act now and use as many tools as possible to change this. The inclusionary housing policy that you're discussing today is one of those tools, and I encourage you all to vote yes, to not delay, and ensure that our community of Portland stays livable and grows in its livability for everyone. Thanks.
Thank you. Shannon?
Hi, I'm Shannon Singleton, Executive Director of Join and Steering Committee member of the Welcome Home Coalition. And I'm in front of you guys so much, it's just a testament to how much we're paying attention to housing right now in Portland. Today I wanted to speak as in my role as Join Executive Director and really bring home the faces of the people that will be living in apartments at 80% of median family income. These are the social workers. These are the Join staff who last Thursday when council was canceled were out there on the streets ensuring that people did not die in the severe weather conditions that we had. They're the people that we rely on to be the front lines of our ending homelessness fight. These are the people who can barely afford to live in Portland any longer. I'm going to keep it brief like I normally do and just really encourage you to look around this gallery at the faces of those staff and ensure that you vote yes to move forward with inclusionary housing. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all. Next 3.
Are Bob Grossman, Bev Logan, and Inga Fisher-Williams, and they'll be followed by 11 Frida Christopher, 13 Lynn Hager, and 14 Jean Favini.
Welcome. with you, sir.
Good morning. I'm Bob Grossman, a leader with the Metropolitan Alliance for the Common Good, otherwise known as MACG, a broad-based community organization of faith, labor, community, nonprofit, and healthcare education member institutions, and the thousands of households they include across Portland's neighborhoods. MACG is not a housing organization, but hearing the increasing and vast struggles within our membership, MACG's Housing Action Team formed and led the TIF lift last year, and this year it helped to lift the ban on inclusionary zoning in Oregon and followed the work of the IZ panel of experts. Having followed the complexities of the IZ work, we can confidently urge you today to vote to pass as aggressive an IZ policy as the panel recommends, in service to the tremendous needs and reality of our city, rather than the desires and fears of certain developers. Though others may urge lowering the bar, please hold firm to the guidance of the panel in serving the dire needs of our city. Information given at a recent panel meeting showed that the IZ goals are in fact doable. The study session with David Rosen showed that Portland is already offering more incentives than most cities. We commend developers who have strongly supported IZ. Others, though, seem bound up by the unspoken rules of entitlement for the most privileged. Those who have prospered from investment of our public dollars in transforming their properties into high-value developments should expect to contribute back to our community to ensure that all classes and races of people will be properly included among the members of every Portland neighborhood with their own opportunities to prosper. This social contract applies to all of us who benefit from society, but there is a special obligation on developers for housing, given the heavy role they played in creating the crisis shortage of affordable housing through their lobbyists and helping to ban anyone or any community in Oregon from using IZ for almost 2 decades. The developer community does indeed have a special obligation to help solve our housing crisis. Don't let them stand in the way again of meaningful progress on affordable housing. Vote to pass IZ. Thank you.
Thank you. Bev?
I'm Beverly Logan, another MACG leader. I wanted to speak today about some specific arguments and dynamics that we've witnessed as we followed the panel of experts and the evolution of IZ policy in Portland. First, it should go without saying that we expect all levels of government to hold all actors accountable to democratically determined rules and not privilege those with more power to bypass or fashion the rules themselves in their own interest. Yet we saw that happen at the state level. The developer community had its way with IZ legislation, first through its 17-year ban, then again in the 2016 legislative session by imposing excessive limits on communities who would use IZ when the ban was finally lifted. Now that Portland has a prospect of inclusionary housing, we do honor those developers committed to moving ahead, but bemoan developers arguing still further against meaningful IZ. We hear there isn't enough certainty to go forward now with robust IZ policy. This is nonsense. No one is exempt from uncertainty. Business involves risk. Developers will always face uncertainty for many reasons beyond IZ. The ban was their misguided effort to buy themselves some certainty, and it figured heavily in the crisis we face today. We can't solve a problem with the same thinking that created it. Our city and our people are in crisis, and it is worsening. That is certain. The suffering and disruption are certain. The resulting strain on public services and nonprofits is certain. If developers need more certainty, you can create certainty here in one of America's hottest markets by helping to pass strong IZ policy now. We also heard developers have to maintain the current rate of return for their projects to be viable and attract investors. And again, this is nonsense. It reveals a sense of entitlement unshaken by the housing emergency so jarring to everyone else. Maximally profitable is not the definition of viable. A ding to one's profit margin is in its destruction. Developers are not entitled to public subsidies guaranteeing their desired profit margin. With an aggressive, firm IZ policy, developers and investors will have the certainty they claim to need. If the law says you will always have to include units affordable at certain thresholds, They can get on with their business rather than waiting to see if derailing IZ now wins them an extra fraction of a percent later. Investors who want part of our market will know what the rules are. Deluges of big money are wreaking havoc on cities across the U.S. and around the world. Against that force, it's imperative you help rebalance the playing field here in Portland so our diverse communities have some chance of surviving and thriving inside the city limits. IZ is one tool toward that end. It's unfortunate that a sense of entitlement among some developers appears stronger than their sense of responsibility for the community that has prospered them, or responsibility for their role in creating the housing crisis we suffer today. We need certainty that the city is doing everything it can to resolve this crisis. We need the city to ensure a reasonable return on our investment as a community. Please vote to make IZ a Portland reality.
Thank you. Ma'am?
Good morning. My name is Inge Fisher-Williams. I'm representing the Sierra Club here today, and I want to speak to Sierra Club's focus on housing displacement and environmental justice. One of our core values at the Sierra Club is that all people deserve a clean and healthy environment to call home. Housing displacement is forcing longtime residents out of their homes and severing the social connections that help to create thriving, sustainable communities. Displacement also contributes to increased suburban sprawl, longer and more polluting commutes, and a greater disconnect between communities in the land. And I quote the Executive Director, Mike Brune. Sierra Club's focus on economic equity was underlined by the city's 2015 report on the state of housing in Portland. In the last year, average rents across the city increased between 8 to 9%, or roughly $100 a month, as we all know. At the same time, low-wage workers have experienced a decrease in inflation-adjusted wages and a reduced ability to find adequate and affordable rental housing. We applaud the considerations of the staff report regarding land use, planning, transportation, and housing goals, particularly policy on balanced communities, on affordability that promotes the development and preservation of quality housing that is affordable across the full spectrum of household incomes and neighborhood stability. We agree with the statement by Commissioner Dan Salzman that inclusionary housing is an important tool to help ensure integrated housing across the city. We applaud his work and the efforts by the entire team to bring this forward. We believe that inclusionary housing is a strategic policy that offers Portland the opportunity to embrace our growing city and ensure that she grows for all who have invested in making it a desirable city for all. We have seen entire neighborhoods that have become out of reach for communities of color, artists, startup enterprises, seniors, the young, and families of the working poor. This diminishes the vibrancy of our city. We have the concern that has already been expressed by council that there are thousands, between 15 and 20,000 units in the permitting queue right now with no affordability requirement. We believe that this speaks to the paucity of community spirit among the ranks of developers who appear to lock arms in greed with landlords who are practicing no-cost evictions in our city. We call this a singular poverty of community spirit and consider such greed regrettable. We applaud all voluntary contributions to the city's affordable housing stock, and there's been some discussions among the council members to take a look at what can be worked out in terms of compromises for those that are not subject to this requirement. We challenge the business community to embrace the concept of economic tithing for the better well-being of our community.
Thank you. Thank you all. Next three.
Are Frida Christopher, Lynn Hager, and Jean Favini, and they'll be followed by 15, 16, 17, Jamie Partridge, London Clower, and Grant Walter.
Sorry, go ahead, Frida.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Frida Christopher, and I'm co-chair of EPAP Housing Subcommittee and a member of the David Douglas School Board. Today, I'm representing EPAP Housing Subcommittee. Previously, you have received our letter in support of the original inclusionary zoning proposal submitted by the Housing Bureau. As you're aware, East Portland is 20% of the landmass in Portland and has 26% of the population. It is Oregon's most ethnically diverse region and a vibrant community of families and individuals, children and seniors, homeowners and renters. It is also an area where the median income is approximately 60% of what Portland's MFI is. Many of our renters have received significant rent increases or no-cause evictions, and many are now being displaced. They are the most vulnerable of our population and can least afford what is currently happening during the housing crisis. There is a great need for an increase in affordable housing, and we feel there is no way the city, county, or state can build our way out of the crisis by themselves. It is going to take the private sector in partnership to make sure there is adequate, affordable housing for our residents of low and modest means. We do not support efforts to provide a full offset of public dollars or efforts to hold harmless developers for all costs associated with the creation of inclusionary zoning's required affordable housing unit. The state only required incentives and not full offset for developers' costs, and the expert task force and PHB crafted a proposal that was more than fair. After listening to Dr. Bates' testimony at the council work session, it is apparent that what is being considered now is far more generous than other cities are giving in IZ programs. IZ is not a panacea, but is one tool among many that Portland can utilize in order to ensure a long-term housing stability for our city. One of its benefits is it captures some of the windfall profits generated by our booming housing market to help preserve the diversity and livability. We support the Housing Bureau's program proposal, which we believe can help provide a significant new supply of stable housing throughout Portland for working Portlanders of modest means. Thank you.
Thank you. Ma'am?
My name is Lynn Hager, and I am a 25-year resident of Portland and an organizer for Portland Tenants United. I'm here today to testify in support of the inclusionary zoning and housing proposal. This policy has been a long time coming, and it's only the beginning of what is needed to protect renters, especially low-income and marginalized tenants, already experiencing rent increases, displacement, and housing instability. Voting in favor of inclusionary zoning would be a step in the right direction toward protecting our most vulnerable citizens. However, this policy will take time. What happens to the tenants who are losing their housing now? What happens to the individuals and families facing houselessness when they receive a no-cause eviction or a rent increase, along with a lack in affordable housing on the market? Where will my 4-year-old go, my fiance, my dog, and I? Last year, 83 people died on the streets. The year before that, we lost 53 people. How many more lives will need to be lost while we wait for inclusionary housing to be built? How many more people will lose their housing in that time and end up living in tents? We have been to council to discuss the TIF to 50, the housing bond, construction excise tax, parking minimums, the comp plan, and the residential infill project. But we haven't seen anything on tenant protection since last fall. And no surprise, the housing crisis is only getting worse. I'm not here to talk to you because I'm worried about my bottom line or my career as a real estate developer. I'm a cost burden renter with a special needs child, with a husband who works 60 hours a week, who can't afford to live in Southwest Portland anymore. And as the Southwest Corridor project continues to go forward, we're going to see more low-income citizens just like me who've lived here like my entire life with no place to go, living on the spring water, hoping that houseless people will take us in because we will have nowhere to go. We need inclusionary zoning yesterday. We need more than these policies meant to act as Band-Aids. We need solutions now. End no-cause evictions, declare a rent freeze, keep Portland housed. Thank you.
Thank you. Ma'am?
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. My name is Jean Favini, and I am a tenant at the Chestnut Court Apartments in Southeast and an organizer of the Chestnut Court Tenants Union. I'm here to support inclusionary housing, but also to address a related and more urgent issue, and that is what can be done now to assure safe, stable, and affordable housing for Portland's renters. At Chestnut Court, my neighbors and I came together to form our union after our landlords announced that they were going to raise our rents 4 times in 15 months. That, combined with the difficulty of getting repairs and abusive behavior by management, convinced us that we had to do something to preserve our community and our homes. We had to act because you haven't. Portland has made national headlines with our record-breaking rent increases and your tolerance of no-cause evictions that ruin people's lives for no reason other than the insatiable greed of landlords and their lobby. My rent has gone up 42% in the last few years. My landlord, who does not live in Portland, by the way, has constantly made threats to me and my neighbors about how we could go live somewhere else or pay much more to stay. Now, those threats are becoming promises. She has hired a management company, a sure sign that our rents will get hiked even more, and our terms of continued tenancy will become draconian. Chestnut Court was built in 1971, and for over 40 years, rents have been kept affordable. The result was that people moved in and stayed, some for 20 years or more. We have a true community there, a diverse group of neighbors and friends whose homes are now threatened because nothing has been done to prevent this tidal wave of greed that is changing the character and quality of life in Portland. So I'm here, and I'm begging you. You can't wait forever to take, we can't wait forever to, however many years it will take for inclusionary housing to make a difference. Tenants in Portland are facing displacement and homelessness this month, this week, today. How many more of us will end up living in our cars or sleeping on a cold Portland sidewalk because money from the rich landlord lobby is more convincing to you than the human cost of your inaction? How can you ignore us like this? We need a rent freeze now. We need a moratorium on no-cause evictions now. I appeal to your conscience, your humanity, your sense of decency. There is no justification for your inaction. It's hard to understand why you haven't acted yet. It's impossible to understand why you won't do it now. Thank you.
Thank you all. Can I get a show of hands? How many more people wish to testify? Okay, we're going to move to 2 minutes a person now.
The next 3 are Jamie Partridge, London Clower, and Grant Walter, and they'll be followed by 18, Jonathan Pulvers, 19, Audrey Ganesh, I believe, and 20, Hugh Ong.
Okay, Jamie, you know the drill. Give us your name. You got 2 minutes.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Jamie Partridge. I'm with the Letter Carriers Union. I'm a delegate to the Northwest Oregon Labor Council, AFL-CIO. Just in case I don't get through my 2 minutes. Yes, pass inclusionary zoning, but it's too little, not enough. As we heard from Dr. Bates, 25 to 40% of Portlanders are rent burdened, cost burdened renters. That's between 150 and 250,000 people. We're being forced out of Portland. We cannot build our way out of this housing crisis. We cannot inclusionary zone our way out of this crisis. We need a rent freeze, rent stabilization, and end to no-cause evictions, tenants' rights. And I'm here again to remind you that the working class, our organizations, the labor unions support the Portland Tenants United campaign to keep Portland housed. Northwest Oregon Labor Council, Portland Association of Teachers, Oregon Education Association, Communication Workers of America, Letter Carriers, Oregon Federation of Nurses, Lewis and Clark's Staff Support Associations, American Federation of State, County, Municipal Employees, Service Employees International Union, laborers. These unions, representing over 100,000 workers, support keeping Portland housed, rent stabilization. The rent prices is trickling up to these workers who are in strong labor unions making living wages, but unlike a decade ago, these workers are not able to buy houses or rent in Portland or live where they work. Every wage raise we get gets eaten up by our rent increases. It now takes $27 an hour working full-time to afford the average one-bedroom apartment in Portland. That's why my sisters and brothers in the letter carriers union make, at the top of our wage scale, $27 an hour for a one-bedroom apartment. Not to mention letter carriers just starting out at $15 an hour. We can't afford to live in the city. Rent freeze now.
Thank you. Sam?
My name is London Clower. I'm a freshman at Portland State University and a new renter. I am a new organizer with Portland Tenants United. I'm also the daughter of Margot Black, the most dangerous woman in Portland. I'm here to ask the city to vote yes for inclusionary zoning. I'm also here to say that inclusionary zoning is only step 0. I pay $725 a month for just my very small apartment in a quad at University Commons. I am fortunate enough to have some financial assistance through both my parents and various scholarships to assist me in paying the rent each month. But if I had to pay it myself, I would either need to work $40 or 40 hours a week, making $13.50 an hour for it to be affordable. Or if I were to work part-time, the more responsible choice for a full-time student, I would have to make $26 an hour. This is the reality for most of my classmates, which is why most of them don't live near campus. They don't live close in, they don't live in Portland. My freshman classmates, those who are just trying to do what you tell us to do, go to school, study hard, create an opportunity for yourself. Most of them live in Tualatin, Hillsborough, Happy Valley, Forest Grove, Canby, Troutdale, and Banks, Oregon. While the fortunate few of us can spend time studying, building friendships, becoming civically involved, and enjoying the great city as newly autonomous young adults, most of my classmates are spending 1 to 2 hours getting to and from campus, and still having 20 to 30 hours, or work 20 to 30 hours a week to paying the rent. My boyfriend is also a student, he wants to be, at PCC. He searched all summer with 2 of his friends for an apartment to live close to campus that they could all afford together, and to no avail, like many of my classmates, he's living with his parents. Many are living in crammed apartments with parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles, and cousins. This quarter, he is not signing up for classes because he would rather work to have money to pay the rent that he needs to live on his own. These coveted few units created through inclusionary zoning are like Willy Wonka's chocolate bar that won't be on the shelves for 3 to 5 years. I'm going to skip a lot of this because we got to.
Actually, your
now.
time is up.
Well, we
so
should keep
just
Portland
wrap up.
housed.
Okay.
It'll be.
Thank you. Okay, sir?
Hi, my name is Grant Walter. I'm an organizer with Portland Tenants United, and just here to say that the city needs you to pass inclusionary zoning. The proposed policy is necessary to hold our communities together, but as Jamie and London said, it's not nearly enough. We need a rent freeze now, and we need rent control, and we need a tenants' bill of rights that supports people who make this city. A city that does not offer its citizens a fair opportunity to have stable, affordable housing when there is available supply is an unreasonable and unjust city. We demand that all of the citizens of Portland receive access to stable and affordable housing. Without this, we are not a city and we are not equal. Those of us who rent, 49% of Portlanders, are in a crisis. Affordable housing is disappearing, wages are not increasing fast enough, food costs are inflating, and the general livability of Portland is out of reach for many longtime residents. Our city government, through lack of action around this housing crisis, is selling out tenants to developers. Inclusionary zoning is necessary, but this alone will not solve the problems that we face. In terms of housing policy, we must have a rent freeze, we must have rent control, we must have a city government that honors a tenant's bill of rights in order to stabilize the market for almost half of Portland's residents.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you.
Next 3 are Jonathan Pulvers, Audrey Gnish, and
You take your sign, Grant.
Hugh Ong, and they'll be followed by 21, 22, 23, Laura Golino De Lovato, Andrew Riley, and Lauren Macbeth.
I lost track of whose name was called first. Was it?
I think right here.
Okay, go ahead. Sure.
Morning, councilors, and thank you for being here. My name is Jonathan Pulvers, and despite my relatively kempt appearance, I am a lifelong Portlander. I'm here because I did for a couple years live elsewhere, and I wanted to share with you a cautionary tale or two. I'm lucky to live here and to be housed, but I have seen the housing prices both where I live and around me rise at astonishing rates. And having spent significant time in the Los Angeles, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., and New York metropolitan areas, I know what it's like when a city becomes a playground for the rich. And I know that you all have an opportunity here to do as Seattle is doing and attempt to mitigate or militate against that possibility. We have heard developers up here talking about changes to this policy that might benefit them. I'm not against policies benefiting developers in some way or another, but given the other considerations that you've heard from other people around here in this meeting and elsewhere, it's borderline obscene that you would privilege developers' profits in any way in this policy above the other concerns that you've heard, and I hope that you'll think about that carefully. So it seems apropos, given that this weekend marked the MLS Cup victory of Seattle's soccer team, following our MLS Cup victory, that you ought to note that Seattle ought to be following us, and we ought not to be following Seattle. Unfortunately, Seattle has jumped way ahead of us in attempting to create a housing policy that makes the city affordable for their residents. And I would hope that you would take note of that and put Portland in its rightful place as the leader in the Northwest with vis-a-vis a housing policy that does that. So I'm not picky about one or another particular detail, but I'd like you to keep the renters and the moderate income folks in mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Ma'am?
Hello, my name is Audrey Gannick. I am here today to speak on behalf of Portland Forward and Portland Families with Children. Portland Forward is a nonprofit organization founded by the late Bing Sheldon, and our mission is to drive Portland's future towards being a great city that is sustainable, equitable, and livable, where all can flourish. I'm also a parent who is lucky enough to be able to afford both childcare and time away from my job to be here to speak on behalf of parents who could not find the time today. We are in support of inclusionary zoning, but we also want to ensure that inclusionary housing ordinance ensures production of family-size units. There are a growing number of families with children in the central city. Many started their families in the district and would love to stay. The city recognized the growing population of families and adopted the North Pearl Plan in 2008 to incentivize family-size units and amenities for families with children. At that time, nearly 90% of the housing stock was comprised of studios and one-bedroom units. Since the plan's adoption, family-friendly 2- and 3-bedroom units have increased to be 27% of the total housing stock in the central city. Many studies show that inclusionary housing have a huge impact on the production of family-size units among market rate and affordable projects because the numbers just don't pencil. Birth rates in the central city have grown 30% since 2003. Our children are here. Let's keep them here. The importance of families in the central city is vital to the stability of our city, to its vibrancy, and to its safety, and to its economic viability. It is our future. Thank you for your time and your leadership.
Thank you. Sir?
I'm Hui Yong, Executive Director of Opal Environmental Justice Oregon. I grew up and call Portland home. As a member of this community, I've experienced firsthand and the rapid rising in housing costs have done to our cities and our communities. I've seen neighborhoods gutted and families forced to move as our homes are literally sold out from underneath us. Profit-driven motives hijacked state housing policy in '99 with the ban on inclusionary zoning. In 2011, Opal identified the ban as a root cause of housing injustice, most manifested in the rampant displacement taking place in North and Northeast Portland. I'm gonna skip a little bit and move on. As we hear from developers, it actually infuriates me that developers come up here and talk about what the market can bear. And I think the question really is for the council is really what can our communities, our neighbors, our families can bear. It is an atrocity that they would come up and think that they can continue to take on this city as their own personal bank. We know that developers do not build affordable units unless you make them do so, at least not in Portland. Unless we make them develop affordable housing, they will continue to flood the market and overbuild luxury units. It's no wonder they call themselves locusts. If we have inclusionary zoning for the last 17 years, we could have prevented the resegregation that happens in our city. This is very real. Look at where you live and who your neighbors are. Oregon now allows inclusionary zoning. It's a weaker version, but one we intend to strengthen at the state level in the years to come. The people of this city demand that this council does not make the policy any weaker because of the crocodile tears some of our region's wealthiest interests share. Developers who have made millions by displacing our most vulnerable communities do not deserve the handouts, special exceptions, and sweetheart deals we're giving them. We do not need to delay or ramp up periods to adjust. They do not need build-wide tax breaks. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Next three.
Are Laura Golino de Lovato, Andrew Riley, and Lauren Macbeth. And they'll be followed by 24 David Scholhammer, 25 Keith Millsark, and 26 Noel Johnson.
Okay, well, start with you, Laura.
Okay, hi, I'm Laura Golino de Lovato. I'm the Executive Director of Northwest Pilot Project. Northwest Pilot Project serves seniors in Multnomah County, 55 and older. We do housing assistance, and we focus on the very, very low-income homeless and at risk of homeless seniors. Inclusionary zoning is a great tool for the package of affordable housing tools in Portland, and we support it wholeheartedly. Inaffordability in housing is not inevitable. It's going to take a lot of work and a lot of steps, and this is one piece of the whole pie. We believe that inclusionary zoning will do a good job in addressing the 80% AMI population, and are happy to see the deeper affordability of 60% addressed, and feel that by addressing these populations, we'll have some extra resources perhaps to address the 30% AMI that we deal with. So I encourage you to support and enact this ordinance.
Colleagues, can I just observe that over my service on the council, Susan Emmons was at the helm of Northwest Pilot Project, and she's a revered advocate in our community. And I think this is the first time that you've appeared officially on behalf of that organization, so welcome. And
It is.
You're filling
Thank you.
big shoes, and we wish you a lot of
Big
success.
shoes, size 19. Yeah. And you will see Susan here and there. She won't go away from the issue.
No, we have plans for Susan.
Yes, good. So do we.
Okay.
Thank you.
Morning, Commissioners. My name is Andrew Riley. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for 1,000 Friends of Oregon and a lifelong Portlander. And I'm here today to lend our full support for inclusionary zoning. I believe our interim director, Mary Kyle McCurdy, submitted written testimony, so I won't read that off at you, but how often do I get a chance to impersonate my boss up here? So 1,000 Friends has been engaged in affordable housing issues since we were founded over 40 years ago. And as I'm sure you know, Goal 10 of Oregon's Land Use Planning Program is housing. And it sets out a really beautiful goal, particularly considering it was written in 1975, which is that every member of our community will have a place to live that meets their needs regardless of their income level. We're obviously pretty far away from achieving that. And that's why 1,000 Friends has fought hard to lift the preemption on inclusionary zoning. We're frankly thrilled that you are rising to the occasion to pass what the state now allows. Inclusionary zoning is a well-tested tool. It's been used in over 500 jurisdictions across the United States, and the evidence is clear. It is one of the best ways we have of encouraging mixed income, integrated neighborhoods, full stop. And as we know, Portland is increasingly segregated by race and class. Socioeconomic desegregation, integration, racial integration are critical for our livability. We can't claim to be a livable city unless that's actually extended to everybody. So the policy in front of you is the best the city is able to achieve. It maximizes what is allowed under state law and delivers the strongest policy possible. We need more affordable homes in Portland, and we need inclusionary zoning. So I want to urge you to pass a policy in front of you.
Thank you.
I just have to object to your dissing the 70s by suggesting it's surprising a good thing was passed in 1975. Remember, the 70s were when a Republican president created EPA as opposed to now when the Republicans are going to destroy it. So don't knock the 70s.
I was born in 1988. I don't necessarily have the historical memory here.
Okay, ma'am.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Lauren Macbeth, and I'm the Assistant Director at Rose Community Development. We're a place-based CDC in Southeast Portland and a nonprofit housing developer, and I'm here today to urge City Council to support inclusionary zoning. We all know Portland is in the midst of an unprecedented housing crisis. To solve this crisis, we need every tool available to combat the problem. We're really proud of the City of Portland for working so hard over the past year to pass important legislation to support giving people a safe place to call home. Today, we have the chance to pair inclusionary zoning with other housing efforts like the recently approved general obligation bond, a short-term rental tax, and a construction excise tax. We know the answer to giving people a safe place to call home is through innovative partnerships. Passing inclusionary zoning will provide an opportunity for for-profit developers to contribute to the solution. In short, inclusionary zoning offers an opportunity for our city to grow strategically and provide all Portlanders with better access to affordable housing. Thank you for working to prioritize housing in our community. It means everything to the people that we serve.
Okay, thank you all. Thank you. Next three.
Are David Scholhammer, Keith Millsark, and Noel Johnson, and they'll be followed by 27 Tom DiChiara, 28 B. Strestra, I believe it is, and 29 DeJeanette M. Thompson.
Welcome. We'll start with you, sir.
Okay. I am David Scholhammer, and I chair the Land Use Committee for the Selwood Moreland Improvement League, better known as SMILE. We want affordable housing in our growing neighborhood. We do not want to lose affordable housing to off-site transfers. We ask that you limit off-site transfers. The 1/2 mile rule you've imposed is good. We suggested a better rule may be to limit transfers within the neighborhood or not allow them at all. Next, we believe that the cost of affordable housing should be shared by everyone. Eliminating parking minimums for affordable housing places a disproportionate burden on residences and businesses in the immediate vicinity of the affordable housing. Residents are faced with reduced on-street parking, increased congestion, decreased pedestrian, vehicular, and bicycle safety, and a reduced quality of life. Businesses have restricted customer access, which can affect their survivability. Therefore, we ask that you do not reduce the existing parking minimums. Our fear is that with transfers, we would get neither affordable housing nor parking. Finally, the proposal before you assumes that the comprehensive plan will change all EX zones to CM3 zoning, and with an early implementation floor area ratio bonus of 5:1. In our neighborhood, however, the EX zones will be changed to CM1 and CM2 with a smaller density in the floor area ratio bonus. This would create a spike in density on our EX zones for our EX properties in 2017, and we ask therefore that you please correct this density spike. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir?
Never done this before. My name is Keith Millsark. I am the Executive Director of Parkview Christian Retirement Community. We are not a developer. We are a single-site, nonprofit retirement community located in East Portland. We offer independent and assisted living to seniors of all incomes. I would like to explain today how inclusionary housing would affect us and to request that nonprofit retirement communities be exempt from this regulation. I've submitted testimony that explains our concerns in detail, which you have just been handed. As proposed, these requirements will apply to new independent living apartments that we are hoping to build next year. The rents for these units will be higher than what the inclusionary zoning would allow, but this is because our rents are not simply rent. We include a host of supportive services such as meals in the dining room, all utilities, cable TV, activities, housekeeping, transportation, wellness and fitness classes, daily well-being checks, chaplain services, emergency call response, and a number of other programs and services that foster the well-being of our residents. To comply with the inclusionary housing requirements, we would be required to decouple these services from our rents and essentially create two classes of tenants, those who benefit from our full range of services and those who do not. This would be very difficult for us from an administrative standpoint and would be unfair to those who are getting the services because they would then be subsidizing those who do not. We're a nonprofit, we're not a developer. We cannot take advantage of the development incentives that the city proposes. The 10-year property tax exemption, the FAR bonuses would not apply to us. Our project pro forma for our new building already assumes that our new units will be tax exempt. We have no need for the FAR bonus. We will bear all the cost of inclusionary housing without any of the offsets. So and we don't have the funds to pay the fee in lieu of the regulations. So we respectfully request that you exempt nonprofit communities like ours from the housing regulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Noel Johnson. I am 37 and have managed or led about 2,000 housing units over the past decade as a developer for a couple different companies here in Portland. And I'm struck to follow this gentleman's testimony because the initial economist you had up here from MIT, he's right in the long run, but in the short run, he's wrong. He didn't tell you about basically how there's essentially when you induce exogenous shock to the system, you create these negative short-term externalities like this. I don't think we're trying to prevent what he's trying to do. I just think the program is not properly crafted to achieve the shared goals that everyone else up here has been testifying about need to be impacted. I mean, I agree with pretty much everything everyone's been testifying about, maybe except for the developers are evil part. But I'm here and I'll continue to be here to try and figure this thing out. The point is, if I'm up here raising the red flag to say, I agree we've got problems, I want to kind of make progress towards solving them, but this is a red flag moment. I don't think we're going to get what we're wanting. But I'm the one that's supposed to implement the policy, and my colleagues, and especially over the decades to come, I'm young enough that I'm really supposed to do this. Shouldn't that be a red flag moment that maybe like a negative externality of, oh, geez, well, nonprofit retirement communities, those guys are okay. Well, this guy's okay. Okay, I think let's take some time to get it right. I think Locus is trying. I think a lot of developers are trying to be engaged and to not be a party of no, but to be a party of, okay, yes, and let's try and tune it up and get it better. We just haven't felt like we've been able to help get to the shared goals that we're all trying to get to. So we're here and we'll try and keep here, but red flags.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you all. Next three.
Are Tom DeShera, B. Shrestha, and D. Jeanette M. Thompson. And they'll be followed by 30, Michael Bionacor, 31, Tram Hong, and 32, Alan Lazo.
Welcome. Maybe you can call one more. Looks like we have room for one more.
Is D. Jeanette M. Thompson? Or Michael Bionacor?
I don't, oh, he is here. Okay, great. Michael Bionacor, come on up. Okay, welcome, sir. We'll start with you. You have 2 minutes.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Tom DeChera, Principal and Co-founder of Cairn Pacific Development. Throughout this process, you have heard from many people in the business of building housing, and they have all told you basically the same thing, that this policy, while well-intentioned, as drafted, is not going to work as discussed, and it will be counterproductive. It is not calibrated properly. It will kill more projects than it helps, and will constrain supply over the long term. It's going to make the problem worse. I've been doing housing development in Portland for 15 years through all scales of project type, and I've looked at my recent projects. None of them would make the cut after this policy was in place. It's not a matter of making less, as some have said today, but rather development is a margin business. And if I can't meet margins demanded by lenders and investors, my projects don't get financed and they don't get built. Developers don't make those decisions. There's no amount of wishing changes that. I have 1,500 other units ahead of this legislation in the pipeline right now, none of which would survive the policy. It's not a bluff, it's just simple math, and facts do matter, as someone said earlier. I wish your consultant was right that, no worries, this mandate will solve our problems and housing supply won't be affected at all, but it's just not the case. Your consultant has used flaws data and anecdotes to support a made-to-order conclusion. The policy will have real and lasting negative impacts on Portlanders. It's not us developers that will feel the pain when you get the policy wrong. When projects no longer pencil, we stop building. We aren't forced to build. You aren't sticking anything to us. When we stop building, affordability problems gets worse. It's simple supply and demand, and Portland renters are the ones that will pay the price in the long term. The recitals of your own ordinance say as much, that today's problems are the legacy of too little building during the Great Recession. Yet we stand here today getting ready to artificially create a new housing recession caused by a well-meaning but deeply flawed policy. Or we can get the policy right by making the program more revenue neutral and recalibrating the inclusion rates as suggested by Locus testimony earlier, to leverage the private sector to attack the problem at a citywide scale. I think we're all willing partners in that effort. Or we can go with the punitive approach to propose today that does the opposite and will do more harm than good. That's the choice today. Many people are going to be very disappointed when this policy fails, and we will have wasted more time getting serious about affordability.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning. My name is Bandana Shrestha. I'm the Director of Community Engagement for AARP, and it's my privilege today to offer these comments on behalf of our members. There are 65,000 of them in the city of Portland. An important part of our work here in Oregon and in Portland is to work on livable and age-friendly communities, including expanding housing options and successful aging in place. During the 2015 legislative session, we were proud to support the passage of Senate Bill 1533. And though the bill that was passed was a compromise, it was a step in the right direction. And now we're very excited to see its implementation here in Portland. It's a new tool that we didn't have before, and it's an important tool to be able to use. You know, the entire state is looking. Here's an opportunity in front of Portland to do the right thing, to expand housing options through the implementation of inclusionary housing program, and we're here to show our support. Also want to thank the folks who have worked on putting together a very solid proposal. We were especially excited to hear about a couple of the things, the mandatory maintaining affordability to perpetuity, deeper affordability, on-site, focus on on-site units, also the focus on, you know, high opportunity areas, making affordability available in those places. Those are all things that are going to benefit people of all ages, all generations, and income. And, you know, there are lots of data. I'm not going to say anything that's not been said by other advocates here, but just that, you know, older adults, we've heard about young people having opportunity here in Portland, but it's also about people who want to continue to live in Portland. You know, after the recession, people of all ages have been impacted, even though traditionally older adults have been homeowners. There are more renters, especially among, you know, minority and lower income households, and that's just going to continue to increase. And we hope you will consider, I just want to say this, supporting, you know, AARP supports the inclusionary housing program and immediate implementation of the full inclusionary rate without delay. And we hope you'll consider adopting the plan with the strongest possible commitment to affordability.
Thank you. Michael.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Michael Bonacore. I'm the Executive Director of Home Forward. And I'm going to speak off the cuff rather than from my prepared remarks today. I want to tell you that I have been working in government, the public sector, and the nonprofit sector for almost 30 years now. And in that time, I've observed the power of public and private partnerships. I think those relationships are critical. I've heard a lot of narratives that are not particularly helpful, that the business community is evil, that they are only concerned about profits and not about people. And I've also heard a lot about how government and the public sector and the nonprofit sector should be more like business, and that things like the market will solve our problems, and that government doesn't really understand how the real world works. And you heard, we heard today from some of the brightest minds in our community, Vivian Satterfield, Dr. Lisa Bates, George Galster. Chair Kafoury is not informable, is formidable herself. Those folks have my confidence. The process that you ran, which was inclusive and thoughtful, but also moves assertively, as you have many times in setting policy, in making resource allocations, and referring a housing bond to the voters this year. You're on the right path. I urge you to stay on it and to vote to approve the inclusionary housing policy without delay. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Was there a Jeanette M. Thompson? Okay, go with Tram Hong, Alan Lazo, Tom Gearing. And after them, I have Amira Streeter, Jeff Bachrock, and Joe Courtwright.
Okay, Tran, I think you were called first.
All right, good morning, Commissioners. My name is Tram Huang, and I am the Communications and Engagement Manager at the Welcome Home Coalition. I'm honored to be here today. Inclusionary zoning has incredible potential to create affordability, diversity, and opportunity throughout Portland. And as a coalition, Welcome Home is urging you to pass this policy as we continue to fight for more affordable housing solutions throughout the metro area. We need far-reaching solutions to address the comprehensive need in our region. The housing bond that Welcome Home helped to pass with your support is meant to help those with very low incomes, such as seniors who live on fixed incomes, single mothers, and those who are living with disabilities. However, our public investments can only go so far as the price of market rate housing continues to rise unchecked and misaligned with Portland's needs. With inclusionary housing, we can leverage new development with underutilized Section 8 vouchers. We can give modest income earners more housing choice, thus taking the pressure off of low-income renters who are facing rent increases of hundreds of dollars at a time. There are Portlanders who have modest wage jobs that simply aren't enough to ensure a safe and permanent home. In a sad twist of fate, this includes the very social workers who are working on the front lines of our housing crisis to prevent people from transitioning into homelessness. They work on the front lines and now find themselves no longer able to afford the city they serve. I am one of those people. As a young professional who was born and raised in North Portland, I've always dreamed of establishing a career and a life here for myself. Even after paying off my student debt from an in-state affordable university, I find it incredibly difficult to afford a place of my own, and I currently live with my parents so I can continue to do volunteer work, volunteer on advisory boards, nonprofit boards, and steering committees. If housing remains unaffordable to emerging professionals like myself, our priorities will have to shift from community leadership and engagement to a second job or potentially even leaving Portland. It's a sacrifice that I hope my civically engaged peers and I will not have to make. Please take action with inclusionary housing today and do not stall. More than ever, we need this policy in our toolbox. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Alan?
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Alan Lazo. I'm the Executive Director of the Fair Housing Council of Oregon here in Portland. As a civil rights organization dedicated to ensuring equal housing opportunity for all, we know that inclusionary housing programs across the country provide opportunity for households with varying levels of income. And it's time for Portland to provide those same opportunities in market rate developments here in our community. You've heard a lot about numbers during this hearing, but there's one number that may get lost in the talk about model calibration and residual land values, and that number is 0. From the State of Housing report that you heard about recently, 0 is the number of Portland neighborhoods in which the average Black, Latino, Native American, or single mother household could afford to live or afford to rent without becoming rent cost burdened. Again, that critical number to discuss today is 0. So as you talk about numbers, I implore you to consider what our values are as a community. We value undoing the forces that created that 0, which has meant 0 opportunity for increased access to better transportation, education, and economic opportunities. The inclusionary tenets of the Fair Housing Act are the foundation of the work we do at the Fair Housing Council of Oregon. And I believe that those ideals must inform your decision. Again, as shown in this State of Housing report, Blacks, Latinos, Hawaiian Pacific Islanders, and Native Americans disproportionately are renters in our community. Lower income renters disproportionately are persons with disabilities. These disparities among numerous protected classes are factors a jurisdiction must consider in its efforts to proactively, affirmatively further fair housing under the Fair Housing Act. Finally, we know that inclusionary housing is only one of the tools that you're working to solve our housing crisis. But inclusionary housing is uniquely important as a tool. It's like that spanner wrench that you have to run down to the hardware store to buy, because it creates housing for varying levels of income in areas of higher opportunity, where market rate developments are being built. So I urge you to pass the mandatory inclusionary housing program next week, fully funded at the 80-20 and 60-10 inclusion rates. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir?
All right. My name is Tom Gearing. I am a research director of the Common Ground, Oregon-Washington chapter. I'm hoping that my comments will partially answer Commissioner Nick Fish's third question. We'll get to that. To make inclusionary zoning work, it is necessary to build a consensus around a quid pro quo, an offset that returns a public benefit in the form of inclusionary units at a value equivalent to the incentives given to the owner or developers applying for the housing program. SB 1533 requires that a financial incentive be offered. Those incentives must be fair and equitable from the perspective of both the owner investors and the tax-paying public. Not too minimal as to impose a burden on the owners, and not too excessive to constitute a windfall at the city's and taxpayers' expense. The means to accomplish this: a public disclosure rule. Any provision of economic value, including cash payments, below market interest rates, waiver, inclusion of fees or taxes, is a subsidy requiring disclosure. This simply means that the details of the subsidy be publicly disclosed. There's ample precedent for this. There are 23 states that have their laws on the books that require private entities receiving any form of subsidy to be disclosing their financial records. A financial worksheet should include routinely and should be accessible to all stakeholders, including City Bureau staff, local housing community, and the affordable housing advocates. And these include calculations of
Your time is up,
all
sir.
costs.
Sorry,
All
your
right.
time's up. Thank you. Okay, thank you all. Next three?
All
Mr.
right.
President, would you agree to a 2-minute compassion break?
Sure. Let's make it a 5-minute compassion break. How many more do we have?
We have about 22 more
22 more?
signed up, if they're still
Signed
here.
up, yeah, I don't think so. The amendments, yeah. So we'll just do the testimony.
Oh, good. I think this is a fantastic hearing. Yeah.
Carla, please call the next three.
Next three are Amira Streeter, Jeff Bachrock, and Joe Courtwright, and they'll be followed by 40, Brian Wilson, 42, Steph Condor, and 43, Lucas Grabowski.
Okay. Oh, she's coming, okay. Okay, Jeff, why don't you take it away?
Okay, thank you, Commissioners. I am Jeff Backrack. I'm a member of the Portland Planning Sustainability Commission. And just because of its some relevance, I will mention I also served 9 years on the Board of Commissioners of the Housing Authority of Portland, now Home Forward. And briefly, I was as moved as anyone listening to the eloquent testimony today, articulating what the problem is we're all dealing with, the affordable housing crisis and the problems it creates for the citizens of Portland. The Planning Sustainability Commission concluded that the IZ program as it's before you today is not quite there as an effective solution to address the problem. The commissioners were persuaded we need IZ. I think many of us on the commission, myself personally, have been working for these kinds of affordable housing solutions to be implemented. And so I just wanted to give you a couple of the concerns the commissioners raised, and they should be kept in mind as obviously we're going to go forward as a city with IZ. And I think we've already heard, even if you implement it now, there's still going to be some more work, some more questions to be answered. And that was really the basis for the Planning Commission's concerns, or certainly my particular concern, that we raised a lot of questions that were not answered at our hearings. We asked for information that there simply wasn't enough time. We're still not even sure if the information exists. A couple of key takeaways, again, as you go forward with this program, there is no clear template that Portland is following. Yes, many cities have IZ programs, but we asked repeatedly, and I think it's become apparent, we're breaking new ground here in the way we're crafting IZ, which is great, but keep in mind, we're not following a path others have trod. We're trying to create our own. This is a complicated regulatory program. Simple solutions aren't going to work. We need to carefully calibrate it and make it work. Couple of thoughts going forward, and Commissioner Fish, you raised some concerns going forward that we had at the Planning Commission. One, there is no template. There is no benchmarking for what we're trying to achieve, what will demonstrate to the city that we're successful or not successful. So we need these sort of benchmarks. We still don't know the costs involved to implement an IZ program.
Okay, thank you, Jeff.
So Jeff, let me be clear. What I said was, from those who have concerns who embrace the concept but have concerns that it may not deliver, what I asked was, what are the indicators that we should be watching? When will we know? And then how should we monitor that? And we do that with all of our programs because we're constantly pruning and fine tuning. And one thing I'm concerned about is there's so many projects in the pipeline beating the February deadline that it may be years before we actually get any good data. But perhaps this is something that the Planning and Sustainability Commission and the Council can take up. What are the things we need to watch to make sure that this policy is delivering on the promise that is driving it? And that's a question that I have, and I want to know what we should be watching in terms of, now, obviously, if all of a sudden on the east side, everything is coming in under 20 units, well, that's an indicator that people are trying to get around the 20-unit floor. But I'm looking for a more robust set of indicators that we can track, and then to know when we have to come back and evaluate its success.
Quick answer, I would encourage, as we design a program for setting benchmarks for evaluating, that the Planning Sustainability Commission, as well as Planning and BDS, be equal partners with the Housing Bureau in designing the benchmarks, in looking out for these indicators, and making a program that's going to work. Because both legally and I think from a policy standpoint, inclusionary zoning started as a land use program, and I think you need that balance between housing and planning as you set your benchmarks, as you try to figure out how to fine-tune this program to achieve the goals we are all trying to achieve. And so I hope there'll be an opportunity for that sort of inter-bureau analysis and collaboration to make this work going forward.
All right.
For the record, Joe Courtwright. I'm an economist. I run City Observatory, which is a think tank on urban policy. We do a lot of research on housing affordability policies around the country. I want to address one key issue, which is you have been told that inclusionary zoning is a well-developed policy and that Portland is following the template of other cities. Dr. Bates, Dr. Galster, and others have said that there's this body of research that shows that this does not have adverse effects. But they are eliding the meaning of the word inclusionary zoning. The policy that you have before you today is materially much more different and much more burdensome than inclusionary zoning in other cities. Other cities do not apply it citywide. They have lower inclusion rates, typically on the order of 10%, and it's typically voluntary. Even New York City's vaunted, quote-unquote, mandatory inclusionary zoning program only applies to upzones, where the developer is asking for more density than allowed in the plan. In Chicago, that program is also voluntary. It only applies where the city has money in a deal or the developer is asking for upzones. As a result, in large cities across the country, there is exactly one city that has produced more than 100 units of inclusionary zoning, new units, over the years that its program has been in operation. So this is a program as applied in other cities that is so small that it has no impact on the problems that are very real that people in Portland face, and that, not surprisingly, that when you look at the studies that are done of these trivially small programs, they don't seem to have an impact on the housing market. So this is a strategy that is both ineffectual and, as likely to be applied in Portland, will be counterproductive because developers have options and investors have options. And if the profit isn't high enough, they will go somewhere else. And when less housing is built in Portland, all of our rent and housing affordability problems will get worse. We do not have an affordability crisis because developers suddenly got greedier. We are overwhelmed by the demand for urban living in great places like Portland, and that will not be resolved until you build more supply. This will make that problem worse.
Thank you. Em?
Hello, my name is Amira Streeter. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Director for the Urban League of Portland. The Urban League is one of the oldest African-American service, civil rights, and advocacy organizations in the area. We are also part of the Inclusionary Zoning Coalition. I just want to say that it is simply not enough to just supply affordable housing. I believe that this is a very well-calibrated IZ program, and coming from Montgomery County, where inclusionary zoning is a beacon of diversity and improvement into the county, I highly encourage you to take upon Commissioner Saltzman's plan and the Portland Housing Bureau's plan that is put before you. Historically, low-cost and multifamily housing has been banned because of NIMBY doctrine and has greatly displaced people of color, particularly Black communities and families. One study showed that from 2000 to 2013, white incomes increased from $55,000 to $60,000, while Black incomes decreased from $35,000 to $30,000. There's not one single neighborhood in the city where the average African American can afford a 2-bedroom apartment, and this is a tool to get that to happen. Also, you need to have rent stabilization and just cause evictions. Many of our folks are terrified of being put out on the street, and Black people are the highest community that are homeless right now. And speaking from a personal perspective, I feel insecure in being in an apartment right now where I can afford, but because there are very few limited options to me and many of my colleagues, I am nervous of if for some reason I can't be in the place I am now, where am I going to go? And that's the question that I want all of you to think about when you're making a decision today, is where are the people going to go?
Thank you. Thank you. And next, actually, I want to get a show of hands. How many people still wish to testify? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, I'm sorry. We're going to have to go to 1 minute because we have to adjourn by 12:30. And I'm also going to announce at this time that we're going to set over till tomorrow at 11 a.m. time certain the votes on the amendments. So we're going to conclude our oral testimony today. We will take written testimony up until 11 a.m. tomorrow. And so, sorry about that, but we have to go to 1 minute. So call the next 3, please.
are Brian Wilson, Steph Condor, and Lucas Grzybowski, and they'll be followed by 44, 45, 46, Doug Klotz, Tim O'Brien, and Jamal Green.
Okay, Brian, take it away.
Well, Commissioners, it's really great to see you all. For the record, my name is Brian Wilson, and I am a longtime community advocate and housing affordability advocate, and having done a number of years on the Portland Housing Advisory Commission too. So I know a little bit of what I speak. I'm also a developer of multifamily housing. I have built affordable housing, and I know how difficult it is to get it out of the ground. I wanted to appear before you today to pledge my support for helping you develop the most comprehensive and workable IZ program that you can. And I will submit additional written testimony to tell you how I think we might go about that as a team. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do I get his 30 seconds?
No,
Just
no,
kidding.
no.
Hi, I'm Steph Condor. I'm the Director of Real Estate Development at Central City Concern. CCC has been actively working in the community for 40 years, helping people experiencing homelessness find stable housing and engage in meaningful life change and reconnection with the larger Portland community. I want to say that we support the inclusionary zoning proposed by Commissioner Saltzman, so we appreciate very much that you've put this together. We feel that it's very comprehensive and fair. I also wanted to note that based on the bond that just went through, we recognize that that'll probably support about 1,500 more units of housing on the market for affordable housing. Just note that this inclusionary zoning, there's about 22,000 units in this stage of construction or permitting right now. And if you were to put this inclusionary zoning, about 15 to 20% of those units would be about 3,500 units more of affordable housing, so much more than your bond. We very much support this.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you both.
Sir Lucas Grzybowski, we'll go Doug Klotz, Tim O'Brien, and Jamal Green. Kurt Schultz.
Okay, I think we got three here.
All right. Hi,
Go ahead.
Doug Klotz. I live in the Richmond neighborhood. Inclusionary housing is an important part of a complete housing strategy for Portland. We need this proposal. We also need to make sure it does not slow down the production of all multifamily units, especially out in the mixed-use zones. I hope that the incentives and requirements in the current proposal are well balanced, or that we will get there. One key component is the removal of parking requirements for all units in mixed-use zones. One of the slides in the previous presentation showed how the addition of the removal of parking requirements brings the RLV back up to where it's in par with the market rates. So need to include that, the removal of parking requirements. I'm also concerned that the IH requirements will stop some development that we've currently been getting out on Division Street and Hawthorne of 20 unit buildings on a 50 by 100 foot lot. So this is not getting around the requirements. This is you have a small lot. And it's unlikely, I think, that voluntary IH will be done on such a small lot because of the administrative costs. So I would say, then we won't get the 20 units now because the FAR is going to drop from effectively 3.5 down to 2.5. So I'm advocating for raise the FAR on these small lots, just so we'll get those 19 units that we were getting now instead of having cut down to 14.
Thank you. Sir.
Hello, Tim O'Brien, lifetime Portland resident, new development company, started in 2013, so I'm building multifamily housing. I do support IZ in the notion of it. I've actually supported low-income housing for in many different ways over my 20 years in real estate, including the last bond measure that just got passed. Saying that, I want to make sure we get it right, because if we don't get it right, as some of my developer cohorts have shared with you, it's the 80-90% of people that are paying, that don't qualify, that are going to have to pay the high rent. So we want to help you get that right. I think also, most importantly, I'm just kind of cutting this short, kind of to Commissioner Fish's question about, what do we need to do to monitor this if we pass it and it doesn't work? What are the leading indicators? Some thoughts I had in that regard. I think in your own permit and land use department, I would look for projects that are coming through the door that actually include inclusionary housing and look at those. That's a clear leading indicator. I think the other component that you could look at that would be even sooner than that would be to actually work with some of the architect firms that build a lot of multifamily housing. Actually, Kurt is a member of Sarah Architects that you're about to hear from, and those guys are going to see it first. You know, are we actually getting money spent and designing projects that would include inclusionary housing? So,
Thank you.
that's all I have.
All right, thank you very much. I'm Kurt Schultz, a principal at Sarah Architects. We've been in business in Portland for 45 years, and we have 150 employees who desperately need affordable housing. We definitely support inclusionary housing as long as it doesn't discourage production, because then no one here in the room gets what we're looking for. And since we are kind of the tip of the iceberg, I wanted to share with you some of the things we're seeing in the market right now. We have typically designed and built about over 500 units per year, probably over the last 6 years. And we typically have a 1-year backlog of 500 to 1,000 units, all within the city of Portland limits. For 2017 past projects that are currently vested, we have a total of 0 new units on the boards that will come post vesting. And this is a significant concern for us. These are 500 units a year that don't look like they're going to get delivered to market. And I know there's a lot of talk about this vast number of units that are coming online now. We're designing many of those, and I can tell you a vast majority of those projects are not going to get built. A lot of those entitlements are just being put on the shelf, and the market is changing. Construction costs are rising, and many of those projects will not move forward. We support inclusionary housing. We want to see this happen, but housing that does not get built is not going to create more affordable units. Thank you for your time.
Thank you all.
Next are Gerald Deloney, Shannon Milliman, and Yasika Ale.
I think we
Mr.
lost.
Deloney left. Let's go with
Yeah.
Diane Lim. And after them is Madeline Kovacs, Brent Perry, and Wayne Wigness.
Okay, then we'll start with you.
Hello, I'm Shannon Milliman. I am a homeowner in the Lentz neighborhood for 2.5 years. My family with 5 children, and my husband and myself, have immediately had an advantage of $300 less in our monthly payment. And strategically long-term, we are becoming much greater examples of contributing members of society and teaching those principles to our children. Stewardship, self-reliance, and family are important values in our home. We plant a garden, and we have urban chickens, and we have a dog that I make sure my son walks, because teaching chores is a part of raising a family. Tonight, I attend a Lentz Neighborhood Association meeting advocating for a library in Lentz. After we tuck our kids into bed, we're working on developing some personal goals. My husband is a music recording artist and trying to start a business in our garage. And I'm working on writing a book. In the daytime, I work for the City of Portland and BES. And in the last 2 years when we've had this home, I've progressed and learned how to be a manager and made a career shift and have found stability because of this.
Thank you. Ma'am.
Hello, my name is Jessica Arevalo, and I am here to urge you to support the inclusionary housing policy. This proposal will work to increase housing affordability while also reducing racial and economic segregation. I have faced homelessness in the past with my children, and I was very fortunate to be able to find a job that pays a living wage. And thanks to that, and also to Proud Ground and the opportunity of buying an permanently affordable home, I have been able to provide for my children a stable home. And so I want to urge you to please support IC so that other families such as myself will also have that opportunity to provide a stable home for their families.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Diane?
Good morning, almost afternoon. Diane Lynn, Executive Director of Proud Ground. Very proud to be in the presence of these two amazing women who are raising their children and having thriving in 2 Proud Ground homes. We're here to tell you emphatically that it's time to pass this inclusionary zoning policy. These women can represent so many more families that could be served in the way they have. around the city. We've worked very hard, as all of you know, to remove the ban. We've worked in coalition with a tremendous number of agencies. We appreciate your leadership in taking this forward. We know this isn't easy, and I do have colleagues all around the country who are working in cities, in jurisdictions that are applying this kind of policy. We know it needs to be fact-checked and course-corrected along the way, but now's the time. It's critically important that we plant these seeds immediately. We've lost a lot of ground in Portland over the last 10 years in my hometown, and families like these two women represent today can be multiplied many times over if you move forward on this policy as soon as possible.
Thank you all.
Thank you very, very much.
Great.
Are Madeline Kovacs, Brent Perry, and Wayne Wigness. Christy White, Katrina Holland, Evan Wellington, Jessica Rojas.
Must get to the very end. Okay, go ahead, Madeline, just give us your name and you have 1 minute.
A minute?
Yeah,
That's
1 minute.
cool. My name is Madeline Kovacs. I'm the coordinator for the Portland for Everyone Coalition. I'm going to read just a couple things here. First, increasing supply of housing to address Portland's current crisis is important, but we need to be equally concerned with who we are building it for and where it's located. I'm here to speak today to two of Portland for Everyone's 5 goals. 1, prioritizing housing for historically and currently underserved populations. And 2, creating and maintaining economically diverse neighborhoods. Skipping toward the bottom now. Yes, the inclusion rate we're talking about today is higher, but so are the proposed offsets. Inclusionary housing has a 40-year track record in over 500 jurisdictions. No other jurisdiction has held developer profits completely harmless when enacting this policy. Portland would be the first. The policy contains the full suite of tools that can be employed to achieve successful development regimes, including direct subsidies, density bonuses, tax abatements, and hopefully further reduce parking requirements. I'll leave it there. I'll submit written testimony. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sir?
Good afternoon. Brent Perry, president of Bremick Construction. And as a contractor in Portland, we are responsible for the family wage jobs of over 100 people. So it's very, very important that you guys get this right. We certainly support mixed income communities, but let's get it right. Approximately 50% of our volume is market rate apartments. And so if we don't get this right and that goes away, you'll see 50 people become part of the problem, not part of the solution. So again, very supportive of it, but let's make sure that we get it right so that it doesn't, as Kurt Schultz said, send it to zero. Zero of zero is still zero. So let's make sure that we get that right. And then also to understand that we collectively, the city, everybody that's doing this, really what we are doing is we need to attract outside investment because that is where the money comes from to do this. Without that outside money, they're going to go somewhere else. We will go to zero.
Thank you.
My name is Jessica Rojas, and I grew up in Northeast Portland since '78. I currently work as the Neighborhoods Program Manager for the Northeast Coalition of Neighborhoods, and I serve neighborhoods I cannot be a part of anymore. This morning I drove from Vancouver, Washington, because that's where I laid my head at last night. And myself and many of my peers, we're finding ourselves being really crafty in our ability to adjust. So I'm going to look at the development sector and ask them to adjust to the needs of our region. Inclusionary zoning was vetted with a lot of input from them already at the state level. And so now it's the city's job to get implemented here locally. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
I say Christy White and Stephen Lang. And if there's anybody else who did not hear their name called.
Okay, Christy, we'll start with you. You have 1 minute.
Thank you, Christy White. There's been a lot of good and smart people testifying in front of you, and I think maybe we should just assume that everybody's a little bit right. And so the question is, what are they right or wrong about? Because this program is critically important to the success of housing people in the city of Portland over the long term. So I'm just going to answer really quickly what I think some of the indicators should be as to whether the program's working. First, we need to start measuring whether or not we're building to the anticipated density in the central city and outside the central city, or whether people are coming in and trying to build under 20 units in order to avoid the program. What units are being delivered, 80%, 60%, which offsets are working better under which MFI program, and what happened to land values? Are the offsets working? I'd also ask you to consider the offered amendment to use the Central City Master Plan process and the DA for an equivalency test, the units built under DAs or Central City Master Plans, because they cover larger property area, might be able to be more flexible. And if they equally or better meet IZ, they should be credited towards IZ. Lastly, I'd like to share in closing that I don't know the developers that many people in this room are talking about, but these are good people, and the majority of people in this town want to make this work. Let's make no question about that. And working with them and not against them, with the people who are building these units, will make this program more successful. Thank you.
I'm Steve Lang. I've been fortunate enough to be able to afford rent in Portland for the past 12 years, although I was close to being homeless at one point. And there was a housing development in the South Waterfront a few years ago where they reserved 20 units for veterans, lower income or whatever, however they described it. I was glad I didn't go down to try to sign up because the line was out the door, down the block, and around the corner, camped out on the sidewalk for 3 days waiting. That was the demand just from the small sub-community of veterans. So that's the kind of demand there is for this kind of housing here. But I was kind of struck by the discussion outlining this project, that there's a buyout feature. And I don't see how the units will ever be built, because it seems to me that the developers could use the buyout feature every time, and then none of the targeted units would ever be realized.
Thank you. Sir.
Hello, Evan Wellington, Secretary of Portland Tenants United. I'll get right to it. IZ is a good thing, but this is the fourth supply side resolution that we've been to City Hall for recently. This is not helping those who are facing profound risks of displacement today. So just a few reminders. I would like you to consider each and every senior or person with disability living in Portland who is on a fixed income. I would like you to consider each and every college student who is increasingly finding it hard to both fulfill their obligations to earn college credits and allocate income to rent and food costs that are increasingly inflated. And consider each and every family living in units they are too afraid to file maintenance requests for fear of finding a no-cause eviction on their door. Each and every minority that faces the added component of discrimination if they are displaced. And this in light of the fact that the Portland Housing Bureau itself released a report as recently as 2015, which found that whites were given preferential treatment as prospective renters 48% of the time. By the way, Saltzman, we need to make sure those equity studies are done yearly. What better time? Please consider these things and keep in mind the fact that they need to be thrown into the considerations where it comes to adjustments to this policy. And in the meantime, in waiting for this policy, we need rent protection, we need a moratorium on no-cause evictions, and we need a rent freeze.
Okay.
Please help us keep Portland housed. Thank you.
Thank you all. Anybody else? Okay, yeah, come on up.
Allison Reynolds with Perkins Coie. I just
Let's
wanted
give your name into the microphone.
Yes,
yeah.
Allison Reynolds with Perkins Coie. And I just wanted to ask the council to leave the record open for written testimony for a week after this. I think there have been some substantive questions that were asked by members of the council, and at least the folks that I work for would like an opportunity to respond to those in writing.
Let's be clear, we're not voting until next Wednesday.
Sure.
So the record does stay open until the council actually casts the final vote.
Fantastic. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Allison.
Okay, thank you. Did any of my colleagues want to ask staff questions at this point, or do you want to just wait till tomorrow at 11 a.m.?
I think we can wait till tomorrow. Dan, the one thing I do want to ask tomorrow, and maybe it'll be a friendly amendment, but I'm going to ask the Housing Bureau to consider this, to give us a preview of how we will be monitoring the implementation of this policy, and when we can expect the first substantive report. And I think to the extent even the strong supporters of the program have come forward and said, here are some of the indicators we need to look at. I want to make sure that the Housing Bureau has the resources they need, that the Bureau of Development Services has the resources they need, and that we work in collaboration with the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability to track the effect of this new policy. And that at the earliest possible stage, if there are if there's a need for us to reconvene and rethink any part of it, the way we did with the multi-program, I want to make sure that that's baked into our policy.
Okay, fair enough.
Mr. President, I did want to hear staff's reaction to Locus's first proposed amendment about collapsing the two PHP proposed Central City Zone inclusionary rate and incentive package.
Previously, we indicated that the record would be closed tomorrow, and then discussion would happen, but Commissioner Fish just indicated that the record would stay open. It is a legislative amendment, so you can leave the record open until the
I would
final
urge us
vote,
to keep it open until the vote.
but you don't have to.
So
Okay. So we can leave it open until the final vote?
Yes,
Is what
but
you're saying.
amendments should be voted on 5 days before
We'll
the
vote on
final
Yeah, the
vote.
minutes are going to be voted on tomorrow. Okay. So, okay, the written record is still open until the 21st. And we will vote on amendments that have been moved and seconded today. We will vote on those tomorrow. We'll have, I believe, the full council here. And thank you, everybody, for being here today. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you, Dan. Well done.
Oh, we're adjourned.